Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. One Piece. While Nami is still young, invite her on my boat at the beginning. Chapter 41. Congratulations to the host for successfully observing Koshiro's swordsmanship from all directions for 3 seconds and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully receiving a refund for the cultivation level of observing swordsmanship for 30,000 seconds. Host already has a deep understanding of Koshiro's swordsmanship. After the system successfully returns the cultivation level, the impression of Koshiro's swordsmanship just now became more profound in Ningchuan's mind. He raised his sword. He began to practice his swordsmanship based on the impressions left in his mind. Koshiro hid at the door of the sword training room, his eyes fixed on Ningchuan. Times of day. He didn't believe that Ningchuan could successfully practice the swordsmanship he had studied for many years in such a short period of time. Under Koshiro's prying eyes, Ningchuan's hand holding the wooden sword also began to move slowly. At first, Ningchuan's swordsmanship is a bit stiff. Although each movement is extremely precise, it seems to lack a unique artistic conception. See this scene. Koshiro, who was hiding in the distance and peeking, couldn't help but feel happy secretly. This kid's swordsmanship is only superficial, and he doesn't understand the artistic conception of the sword. It seems that if you don't practice for 10 or 8 years, you won't be able to practice it. However, it is quite rare to be able to practice swordsmanship to this extent after just one exposure. Koshiro commented silently while watching Ningchuan practice his sword. Naturally, Ningchuan had noticed Koshiro's peek through his sight and knowledge. It was the malicious smile on his face. However, Ningchuan did not expose his little thoughts directly, but only raised the corners of his mouth slightly. Wait until this swordsmanship practice is completed. Ningchuan stood there and whispered in his mind. System, start calculating the cultivation base. Congratulations to the host for successfully practicing Koshiro's swordsmanship once and activating the 10,000 times return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully receiving a refund for practicing Koshiro's swordsmanship 10,000 times. Host's use of Koshiro's sword skills has been greatly improved. I heard the voice of the system in my mind. I feel that the cultivation level returned by the system has arrived. The corners of Ningchuan's mouth were raised higher than before. Koshiro, this is my second sword practice, don't be scared. Ningchuan once again pulled out his wooden sword. He continued to practice according to the swordsmanship he had just practiced. Watching Ningchuan start to practice swordsmanship again, Koshiro, who was peeping from a distance, couldn't help but smile. Ningchuan, although your talent is good, it's impossible. Before Koshiro finished speaking, his pupils suddenly shrank, as if he had seen an incredible scene. He was so shocked that he couldn't even speak. I saw that Ningchuan's starting position for practicing swordsmanship this time actually contained a hint of sword intention. Although there is only a trace of it, it is indeed the sword intention contained in the swordsmanship that Koshiro has always requested. At this time, looking at the swordsmanship practiced by Ningchuan, it suddenly became more agile. Every time he swung his sword, there was a trace of sword intention contained in his sword. Although the number is small, the sword intent has never been interrupted. Koshiro could see that at this time Ningchuan's swordsmanship was no longer just an imitation of skills, it was only similar in appearance as before. Now his sword really has a touch of godlike artistic conception. Ningchuan, you brat, you actually. Koshiro's voice was slightly trembling. It was really hard for him to imagine how Ningchuan could grasp the trace of sword intent from swordsmanship in such a short period of time. It took him, Koshiro, more than 10 years from practicing swordsmanship to finally feeling the slightest hint of sword intent. As for Ningchuan, it took him less than 10 minutes to feel this trace of sword intent. No, only twice to be precise. I saw myself using it once and then practicing it twice. Ningchuan quickly finished practicing this set of sword skills again. After sheathing his sword, he glanced at Koshiro who was hiding there and peeking. Seeing the shocked look on his face, Ningchuan couldn't help but reveal a smirk. It's just the beginning, Koshiro, and you were so shocked that you looked like this, so don't faint from the shock next. System, continue settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully practicing Koshiro swordsmanship once and activating the 10,000 times return system. System, continues settlement. Congratulations host. System, continues settlement. 20 minutes later. Koshiro watched as the sword intent contained in every sword wielded by Ningchuan was no less than his own. He was completely stupid. Only 20 minutes. He actually understood all the essence of swordsmanship that I have summarized in my life, and can he still use it directly? And every sword contains incomparable majestic sword intent. How is this possible? Is the world crazy, or am I crazy? Koshiro couldn't believe what he was witnessing. If he hadn't slapped himself several times and pinched his thighs, they would have been swollen. He thought he was having an incredible dream now. Whoa, there was a sound of a wooden sword piercing the air. Ning Chuan held a beautiful sword flower and successfully put the wooden sword in his hand back to his waist. He turned his head, looked at where Koshiro was, and smiled. Mr. Koshiro, what do you think of the swordsmanship I just used? He heard Ning Chuan calling him. Koshiro finally recovered from the shock. It turns out this kid knew I was peeking at him all along. No, this fool must have been letting me see it on purpose. He wanted to see my joke. Koshiro's blood pressure suddenly rose as he guessed Ningchuan's true intention. If he hadn't been practicing swordplay all year round, he would be in good health. I'm afraid I'm going to be so angry that I'll just lie down on the ground. Koshiro stared at Ningchuan fiercely for a while. But in the end, he could only sigh helplessly and said helplessly. Forget it, you are awesome. You fool, you've passed the test. I can't teach you anything about swordsmanship. From now on, you can rely on the swordsmanship you just practiced and the sword intention you have learned to walk your own path to become a swordsman. At this point, Koshiro suddenly became serious. He stared into Ning Chuan's eyes and spoke with a very serious expression. I know, you want to take Kuina out to sea next. But you must promise me one thing, that is not to let Kuina practice at the pace of you fool. Although she is a piece of rough jade, your way of cultivation is too talent-based and is not suitable for the path she wants to take. If you kid dares to teach her a bad lesson, even if I can't beat you in the future, I will have to try my best to beat you up. Looking at Koshiro, his expression became extremely serious at this time. Ning Chuan nodded seriously. Mr. Koshiro, don't worry. Until she understands the meaning of the sword and starts her own journey as a swordsman, I will not interfere with her practice. Looking at the extremely serious look on Ning Chuan's face, Koshiro could tell that Ning Chuan was not joking, but answered his question very seriously. Ning Chuan's attitude made him feel relieved a little. However, his heart didn't let go for long. Ning Chuan's annoying voice sounded again. Mr. Koshiro, now that we have finished learning swordsmanship, let's move on. Let's start learning how to make swords. Looking at the evil smile on Ning Chuan's face, Koshiro was so angry at his words that he almost fell to the ground. Don't you know how to take a break, you fool? You've just finished learning my sword skills, now you're going to start learning my family's sword making skills. Even if you are gathering wool, you have to take it slow and give the sheep some time to grow wool. What on earth do you mean? Are you so anxious to kidnap my precious baby? Looking at the furious Koshiro, Ningchuan could only helplessly shake his head, feeling a little disappointed. It seems like I won't be able to learn sword-making skills today. I don't know when Koshiro will get over his anger, I just hope he can do it soon. Otherwise, I might not be able to keep up with the excitement of the East China Sea. Just as Ningchuan was preparing to end today's practice, he took a good rest. Wait until Koshiro's anger dissipates a little before he mentions learning sword-making skills. However, just when he said goodbye to Koshiro and was about to leave the gym, Koshiro's voice reached his ears at this moment. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the morning, the old man will open a furnace in the back mountain to practice a batch of swords. If you are interested, you can come and take a look. The port of Shimotsuki village. Kuina has arrived on Ningchuan's boat. The sensible Nami has already taken out the paintbrush. Start adding Kuina's portrait to the flags hanging on the ship. Okay, from now on, there will be 4 of us on this ship. Looking at the painted Kuina as an avatar, Nami looked very happy with her arms folded in front of her chest. Kuina looked at her portrait on the flag and couldn't help but smile. However, as she smiled, she began to worry about Ning Chuan. Afraid that he would not pass his father's test. After all, his abominable father only gave Ning Chuan 1 day to practice. 1 day is definitely not enough for a swordsman's practice. Nokigao seemed to see what Kuina was thinking. He reached out and rubbed Ji Yulina's head, smiling and comforting her. Don't worry, things that are difficult for ordinary people are not that difficult for Ning Chuan. His training speed shocked even Marine hero Lieutenant General Garp. After Nokigao finished speaking, Kuina showed a rather shocked look on her face. Lieutenant General Garp, is he the Marine hero who captured One Piece Roger? In the East China Sea, Lieutenant General Garp's name was mentioned. There is almost no one who doesn't admire him. Of course, except for pirates. You guys had a lot of fun chatting. Ning Chuan's figure flashed and landed directly on the deck of the boat. Looking at Ning Chuan, who had returned to the ship so quickly. Both Nami and Nokigao had a happy look on their faces. They were familiar with Ning Chuan's character. Ning Chuan's ability to return to the ship so quickly shows that he has fulfilled Mr. Koshiro's request. But Kuina couldn't help but frown when she looked at Ning Chuan, who suddenly appeared here. Ning Chuan, have you successfully practiced my father's swordsmanship? Kuina said doubtfully with a hint of disbelief. Looking at Kuina with worry written all over her face. Ning Chuan smiled and took out the wooden sword brought out from the gym, pointed the sword tip towards the sea, and chuckled. Whether it is successful or not, you will know after you try it. After saying that, the corners of Ning Chuan's mouth raised slightly. All the armed domineering energy in his body was brought out by him at this moment, covering the wooden sword in his hand. He took a deep breath, and the momentum around him suddenly reached its peak. The powerful aura instantly shocked Nami, Nokigao and Kuina. They were all stunned on the spot, staring at Ning Chuan's next move with their eyes wide open. My momentum has reached its peak. Ning Chuan no longer had any reservations, pointed at the vast sea in front of him, and slashed his sword down hard. Following the flash of sword light, the sound of the long sword piercing the air was sharp and harsh. At this moment, it seems that even the passage of time has slowed down a lot. In the shocked eyes of the three people, the originally rough sea 100 meters in front of the boat was split into two by Ning Chuan's sword. The seawater on both sides seemed to be cut by invisible blades, revealing a secret passage leading directly to the bottom of the sea. This process lasted for 5 minutes. It wasn't until all the sword intent that Ning Chuan slashed out dissipated, that the sea that was split into two slowly healed together. Bang! Just when the three women's eyes widened in shock at Ning Chuan's sword, they were unable to say a word. A crisp blasting sound reached the ears of the three people. They looked back and saw the wooden sword that could cut open the sea. At this moment it exploded and turned into a pile of sawdust. It's a pity, this sword really can't withstand the power of my domineering power. If there was a supremely sharp knife, the power of this move would at least be doubled. Ning Chuan sighed helplessly and blew away all the sawdust in his hands. However, there was no regret on Ning Chuan's face at this time. Because he knows that he should be able to hold the supreme sharp knife tomorrow. Time flies. Early the next morning, when Nami and Nokigao were still sleeping, Ning Chuan arrived at the back mountain of the island at the agreed time to see the place where the Shimotsuki family made swords. It is Koshiro's father, Kozaburo, who is in charge of the family's sword-making affairs. Kozaburo is a master swordsmith who has made 2 famous swords. And they are all famous swords of the level of fast swords. There are only 21 famous swords of this level in the world. One is the Wado Ikimonji that Zoro always carries in his hand in the original plot. The other one was Enma in Wano country, and was later held by Zoro. These 2 extremely famous sharp knives were both made by Kozaburo. This shows how powerful he is in knife-making technology. It's just a pity. Ever since Kozaburo led his family to leave Wano country and successfully lived in seclusion in the East China Sea. Except for the word, Wado Ikimonji, he has never been able to create a famous sword of the level of a fast sword. Ning Chuan's footsteps landed steadily in front of a rather dilapidated-looking hut deep in the mountains. An old man with white beard, hair and eyebrows came out of the house with a cigarette in his mouth. After carefully looking at Ning Chuan up and down, he finally spoke. The sword intention is restrained and never dispersed. If you don't feel it carefully, I'm afraid it will be difficult to realize that your boy is actually a swordsman. Not bad, interesting. You should be the Ningchuan whom Koshiro mentioned yesterday, right? I heard the old man mention his name. Ning Chuan nodded seriously. Hello, Kozaburo-senpai. I came here this time to learn how to make swords with you. I want to create some supremely fast knives. As soon as Ning Chuan finished speaking, Kozaburo couldn't help laughing. Ha ha ha, you boy, you are really as arrogant as Koshiro said, I like it. There are only 12 supreme swords in the world, and you want to make several of them yourself. Young man, you are quite greedy. After listening to Kozaburo's comment about being too greedy, Ning Chuan just smiled lightly and didn't say much. After all, he has a 10,000 times cultivation return system, which ordinary people cannot understand. Yes, you are confident enough. Otherwise, it would be impossible to reach the realm of swordsman in such a short period of time. With your kid's qualifications in swordsmanship, sword making is definitely enough. Having said this, Kozaburo suddenly looked at Ning Chuan with a wicked smile and said, however, the sword-making technique of my Shimotsuki family is a family tradition and is generally not passed on to outsiders. So, when will your boy marry Kuina? Ah, Ning Chuan was really shocked by Kozaburo's words. Why are there still people rushing to give away their precious granddaughters to others as wives? However, this suggestion is not bad. It's just that it's still too early for Ning Chuan. If he had mentioned this matter a few years later, maybe he would have just nodded in agreement. I said, old man, it's the age of discovery, why are you still playing those old-fashioned things? Let's do this, you teach me how to make a sword, and I will help you make a supremely sharp sword. If you can't build it, I will stay here and help you for the rest of my life. What do you think? Ning Chuan naturally guessed that the old man Kozaburo was joking with him. So he responded half-jokingly. Ha ha ha, you kid, do you really take yourself seriously? When I asked you to marry Kuina, I already relaxed the conditions for you. Why do you have to make it more difficult for yourself? Koshiro glanced at Ning Chuan with a sneer and said disdainfully. Open your mouth and shut up, it's the supreme sharp sword. Do you really think that the supreme sharp sword can be made just because you want to? I've spent my entire life in the sword-making profession, and I've only managed to forge 2 sharp knives. You, a young boy who has just entered the industry, no, has not yet entered the industry, dare to think about the ultimate sharp knife. Okay, since you dare to make a condition, then you can stay. Anyway, I need a helper, so you can stay here and help me for the rest of my life. Say it. Kozaburo waved his sleeves, took his dry cigarette in his mouth and turned towards his sword-making place. Looking at the slightly angry Kozaburo, Ning Chuan smiled faintly and followed quickly. The place where Kozaburo forged his sword was a small fire called Yamanaka nearby. He seemed to have hollowed out the entire mountain, and he didn't stop until he reached the magma at the bottom of the mountain. He used the geothermal heat here in a special furnace to forge swords. Walk inside this small volcano. Ning Chuan felt a wave of heat rushing towards him. You brat, help me bring those sword embryos here. As soon as Ning Chuan walked into this small volcano, Kozaburo's voice reached his ears. Good guy, this old man is so rude. They really treat me like a handyman. It seems that this old guy really doesn't believe that I can make a supremely sharp knife. Ning Chuan wasn't angry either, just a smile on his lips. He was already looking forward to seeing Kozaburo's shocked expression when he saw that he had actually built the supreme sword. Ning Chuan counted the sword embryos piled at the door. No more, no less, a full 20. Ning Chuan's eyes swept over the rows of sword embryos stacked together. He found that each sword embryo exuded a faint metallic luster. He stretched out a hand and flicked the sword embryos lightly. Buzz. A crisp buzzing sound instantly spread far and wide. Good embryo. Ning Chuan couldn't help but admire these sword embryos as he looked at them. Even though they were uncarved, their quality was enough to make people shine. As expected of a swordsmith who can forge 2 powerful swords, he is really willing to spend a lot of money on the selection of sword embryos. Each of these sword embryos was carefully selected by Kozaburo. Even Ning Chuan, a newcomer who has not yet started learning to make swords, can recognize their extraordinariness at a glance. I heard Ning Chuan's evaluation of these sword embryos. A rare proud smile appeared on Kozuburo's old face. He walked to Ning Chuan and said, I guess you have a lot of vision. These sword embryos, the base material alone, has reached the standard of a fast knife, far from being comparable to those on the market. In order to save these embryos, it took me 3 years to gather them together. If the refining process goes smoothly, these sword embryos will definitely be reborn and become truly good swordsmen, and may even have the potential to be promoted to great swords. Kozuburo picked up a sword embryo and gently rubbed it in his hand. It can be seen that the old man Kozuburo is very precious to these embryos. According to the level of sword weapons in the pirate world, from low to high, there are 5 levels: ordinary iron, fast knife, good fast knife, great fast knife and supreme fast knife. To become a famous sword, you only need to reach the level of Liang Kuei Dao to be eligible to enter the ranks of famous swords. However, Kozuburo's sword embryos have reached the same quality level as Kuei Dao. This shows how precious these materials are. 20 sword embryos in total. If you're lucky, you should be able to produce 1 or 2 good sharp knives. If you have better luck, you should be able to produce a sword close to the level of a great sword. Listen to Kozuburo talking about the probability of these sword embryos becoming famous swords. Ning Chuan's brows couldn't help but frown together, and he couldn't help but speak. Old man, your sword-making skills don't seem to be very good. How come such a good sword embryo can't even produce a big sharp sword? Aren't you a waste of natural resources? Kozuburo. Roll, little fool, you really think that sharp knives can be picked up casually on the roadside, right? There are only 21 knives in the world that can be called fast knives. Every time there is a big sharp sword, all the swordsmen in the whole sea will collectively go crazy. If I can forge 1 sharp sword out of 20 sword embryos, then even if I can't forge a supreme sharp sword in my life, I can still be called a legendary swordsmith. After scolding Ning Chuan, Kozuburo suddenly felt that the anger in his heart had subsided a lot. However, Ning Chuan still looked confident after being scolded by him. The anger he had just gone down came back up again. You brat, looks like you're still not convinced. Come with me, I'm going to start forging knives now. Each knife takes at least 3 days. There are 20 knives in total. You can watch them here for 60 days. After 60 days, you must make me a good and sharp sword. If you can't make it, either get out of here immediately, or marry Kuina immediately and stay here as the heir of the Shimotsuki family. After saying that, Kozuburo angrily picked up a sword embryo and walked into the sword-making room. Looking at Kozuburo leaving, Ning Chuan couldn't help but smile. Hey, this old man has such a bad temper. 60 days, such a long time, you will miss the wonderful show of the East China Sea. I don't have time to stay here that long. Ning Chuan smiled and shook his head. He casually took an ordinary sword embryo of ordinary iron quality from the sword embryo shelf in the distance. Taking confident steps, he walked into Kozuburo's sword-making room. 3 days should be enough for me to become a master swordsmith, right? Watching the moment Ning Chuan stepped into the sword-making room with a mortal iron-level sword embryo. The corner of Kozuburo's mouth tilted and he smiled in his heart. I guess you have some self-awareness, so you didn't waste the good sword embryo that I worked so hard to save. A sword of mortal iron level, I want to see what level of sword you can make. Feel the fiery aura of iron and fire filling the air. Ning Chuan carried the sword embryo in his hand and came to another casting platform next to Kozuburo. Standing on the workbench made of special materials, looking at the continuously boiling magma below, Ning Chuan couldn't help but admire in his heart. Kozuburo is indeed a master swordsmith. He is able to use the power of nature so skillfully to forge swords. Boom! Just when Ning Chuan was praising Kozuburo for finding such a good place to practice his sword, suddenly a dull sound attracted his attention. Watch it, Ning Chuan. Kozuburo's voice was steady and powerful, and the sledgehammer in his hand landed accurately on the sword embryo on the workbench. Every time he struck, a large number of sparks flew out. Forging is the soul of making swords. Every inch of a good knife has to go through countless forgings, from the tip to the blade, from thick to thin, from soft to hard. The strength of every part of a knife must be just right, neither more nor less, neither heavy nor light. Only in this way can a good knife be made. Ning Chuan stared at Kozuburo's extremely focused face. He nodded silently in his heart and kept his words in mind. Seeing the serious look on Ning Chuan's face, Kozaburo continued. To master this delicate balance and exert the most suitable force on each part of the sword, it will take at least several years or even decades to master it. However, for those who are good at using swords and understand swords, this time may be shortened a lot. Having said this, Kozaburo changed the topic and spoke with a smile on his lips. So, if a swordsman learns to make swords, it will be much easier than a simple blacksmith. You boy, you have become a swordsman at such a young age. It is because of your talent in swordsmanship that I am willing to teach you how to make swords. I'm going to start exercising next, so don't blink at me, kid. Otherwise, if you miss this time, I won't give you a slow demonstration on how to forge in the future. Say it. Kozaburo directly picked up a hammer and covered it with armed haki. Insert the sword embryo deeply into the magma, wait until it burns extremely red, then raise the hammer and start forging. This place needs a hard knock. Tap here. Speed and power must be even here. Although Kozaburo wanted to give Ningchuan a slow demonstration. But in fact, his speed is not slow, and the hammer in his hand is almost throwing out sparks. However, under Ning Chuan's top knowledge and domineering power, he carefully watched the process of forging Kozaburo from all directions. 3 hours later, Kozaburo's first forging session finally stopped. Ning Chuan, on the other hand, watched the entire process without even blinking. When Kozaburo picked up the hammer and started hammering for the second time, Ning Chuan spoke directly in his heart. System, start settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully watching Kozaburo's knife forging skills for 3 hours and activating the 10,000 times return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully receiving a refund for 30,000 hours of watching Kozaburo's sword forging skills. Host's understanding of Kozaburo's knife forging techniques has been greatly improved. Feel the cultivation returned to you by the system. Ningchuan already has a very clear understanding of Kozaburo's sword forging skills in his mind. Including the entire process of forging the knife, the amount of force required to beat each part, and the control of the heat are all very clear. Kozaburo, who had already started forging for the second time, had already begun to speed up. Boy, I just demonstrated it to you. How much did you remember? While Kozaburo was forging the sword embryo seriously, he also took the time to ask Ning Chuan about his progress. I've almost memorized it all. Hearing Ning Chuan's words, Kozaburo, who was holding the hammer in his hand, suddenly paused. The whole person instantly lost the rhythm of forging, leaving an imperfect spot on the sword embryo. It made Kozaburo feel distressed for a long time. When he slowly resumed his forging rhythm, Kozaburo spoke in an unbelievable tone. What the hell? What did you say? Remember everything? How is that possible? There are so many processes, and I haven't watched the chain beating thousands of times. How can I remember them all at once? Look at the shocked look on Lang's face just now. Ning Chuan said with a smile. Remember, just remember. Why did I lie to you when I had nothing to do? There is no benefit. Finished answering Kozaburo's question, Ningchuan stared at Kozaburo for a while, and asked a question he had when he was watching Kozaburo forging. Sir, you need to control your strength when forging a sword, right? Hearing this, Kozaburo nodded. Although I don't understand what Ningchuan wants to ask. But he had a hunch that this kid's question might not be easy to answer. Then why do you have to hit it with a hammer when forging a knife? I think it would be more accurate to control the power by directly covering the hand with armed domineering energy and beating the sword embryo directly with your fist, right? In addition, it can also accurately control the temperature of the sword body, greatly improving the yield rate. After hearing Ning Chuan's doubts, Kozaburo's entire old face suddenly darkened. At this moment, when he looked at Ning Chuan again, he looked like he was looking at a fool and said with a hint of sympathy. Isn't your brain lacking in strength? Think about it carefully. Before you beat the sword embryo, where did the sword embryo get angry? That's magma. It's magma. Even if it's not magma, but some ordinary furnace, it still has a high temperature of thousands of degrees. Can your armed and domineering body withstand such a high temperature for several hours? It won't burn you to death, you little fool. Kozaburo cursed Ning Chuan for a long time before finally stopping. Seeing that he had left a few irregular marks on the sword embryo because of scolding Ning Chuan, he felt heartbroken. Now he can't figure out how this kid has such a brain. Why do you think about such weird things all day long? You even forge the sword embryo with your hands instead of a hammer. How? What are you doing, kid? Are you dying? Just when Kozaburo was still angrily complaining about Ning Chuan. When he turned his head, he saw a scene that almost scared him to pee. I saw Ning Chuan, this silly young man, actually pushed away the workbench. He picked up the sword embryo on the table and inserted it into the hot magma. Immediately afterwards, he clenched the hand covered with powerful arm domineering into a fist. He directly began to beat the sword embryo in his hand in the boiling and bubbling hot magma under the workbench. Seeing this scene, Kozaburo was so frightened that he threw his hammer away. He rushed towards Ning Chuan's position desperately. Ning Chuan smiled faintly, looked at his hands that had just touched the hot lava, and muttered softly. System, start settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully resisting the magma for 1 second with his domineering energy and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully receiving a refund for the cultivation level of using domineering power to withstand magma for 10,000 seconds. Host's resistance to magma has been partially improved. After the first settlement of cultivation is returned, Ning Chuan clearly felt that the burning sensation of the magma on him had been greatly reduced. There was no longer the intense burning sensation the moment he inserted his hand into the magma. However, Ning Chuan was still not satisfied, even if it has gained some resistance to magma. But you can't last long in the magma in this state. So Ning Chuan continued to say in his heart, System, continue settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully resisting the magma with his domineering energy for 10 seconds and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully receiving a refund for the cultivation level of using domineering power to withstand magma for 100,000 seconds. Host's resistance to magma has been greatly improved. No, continue to settle. Congratulations host. Continue to settle. The cultivation level brought by each settlement will be returned. 10 minutes later, Ning Chuan's hands covered with armed domineering energy were able to completely resist the invasion of magma. His hands in the lava felt almost the same as in ordinary warm water. Kozaburo on the side watched this scene helplessly. From the initial shock to the later numbness, now he is staring at Ning Chuan's domineering fist covered with armed color, and he is constantly beating the sword embryo of mortal iron level crazily in the magma. Kozaburo felt like he was going crazy. Here, what's going on with this little brat? He actually pressed his hand into the magma and forged the sword embryo. 10 minutes. He has been forging his hand in the lava for 10 minutes. Is this human? Kozaburo couldn't understand. He knew that Ning Chuan's domineering power was very strong, but he never thought that his domineering power could be so strong. This is lava, terrifying magma that can melt steel. No matter how strong the human body is, how can it withstand magma? What Ning Chuan is doing now has completely subverted Kozaburo's 3 views. Chang, listening to the sound of Ning Chuan constantly striking iron in the magma. Kozaburo swallowed. He stretched out his hand and pinched his thigh hard several times. It wasn't until a heartbreaking pain came that he finally believed that what he saw was real. Always keep the sword embryo in the magma and quickly shape it by hand forging. Doing this can speed up the sword embryo's forming process. It's really rare that this kid can think of this. But why is this boy's forging skills actually starting to get better and better? Is he really a genius? Watching Ning Chuan continue to forge the sword embryo, Kozaburo unexpectedly discovered that Ning Chuan's strength and skill when forging now are much stronger than what he did at the beginning. At this time, Kozaburo was in a place unknown to him. Ning Chuan used his fist to forge the sword embryo for a period of time every time. He was muttering silently in his heart. System, start settling forging technology. Congratulations to host for successfully forging the sword embryo in 5 seconds and activating the 10,000 times return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to the host for successfully getting the 50,000 seconds of forging the sword embryo back. host's forging technology has been greatly improved. As Ningchuan forged the sword embryo, the speed became faster and faster. Gradually, they became afterimages in Kozaburo's eyes. Seeing the speed at which Ningchuan forged the sword embryo, Kozaburo was dumbfounded. What the hell is this guy doing? His forging speed is already faster than when I was at my peak. Not only is it fast, but at the same time, it is very precise to control the strength and position of the sword when forging it. At this rate, it won't take an hour to forge a sword. This is too scary. Just when Kozaburo was extremely shocked, Ning Chuan was seen picking up the sword embryo that was burned red by the magma in his hand. Press it directly into the cooling water prepared in advance. Stab it. There was a sound of water and fire mingling. The hot white steam instantly filled the entire sword-making room. Wait until all the surrounding white smoke dissipates. Ning Chuan's first work as a swordsmith finally reveals its true form at this moment. Ning Chuan picked up the sword he forged for the first time and reached out to touch it. Then he showed a quite satisfied smile. He looked at Kozaburo, who was staring at the sword in his hand with great curiosity. Ning Chuan smiled and handed over the sword directly. Old man, I think this sword can meet your requirements, right? Hearing Ning Chuan's words, Kozaburo, who took the sword, couldn't help but was stunned for a moment. Can you meet my requirements? Did this kid successfully build a good and sharp knife for the first time? How is that possible? Kozaburo didn't believe Ning Chuan's words at all. So he directly grabbed the long sword from Ning Chuan's hand, held it in his hand and looked at it. This long sword has a plain and unpretentious appearance, with smooth and simple lines. The blade of the sword continued to release wisps of light, and there was a hint of chill on the blade. Kozaburo stared at it extremely seriously. When he didn't get it in his hand at first, he thought it was just an ordinary sharp knife. After all, for a novice, being able to forge a fast sword would already surpass most swordsmiths. However, when he took the sword into his hands, as his fingers lightly touched the sword body, he felt an unusual and special texture coming through his fingertips. Kozaburo immediately froze on the spot. Because of this texture, he has encountered many of them throughout his knife forging career. This is a special texture that can only appear when a knife reaches the level of a famous knife. It is impossible to appear on swords below the famous sword level. Thinking of this, Kozaburo's heart moved. He knew that this knife had obviously surpassed the category of a fast knife and reached the level of a good and fast knife. Using ordinary iron to make a good and sharp knife. It was a success on the first try. This boy's talent in forging swords is really terrifying. After sighing, Kozaburo shook his head and sighed again. I feel ashamed to say it. I can hardly make a good and fast knife even with a quick knife embryo. But this kid not only took an iron embryo and forged it for the first time, but he made a good sharp knife. Oh, I am so old. Just when Kozaburo lamented that he was old, he subconsciously held the long sword and swung it forward casually. The target is the test stone placed not far from the sword-making platform. As his sword edge passed by, it was like a kitchen knife cutting tofu, without feeling any hindrance. Just when Kozaburo felt a little confused about the feeling of his hand crossing the test stone. Just listen to a clear, click, sound. The giant test stone with countless incisions was cut into two. It made a loud noise and began to slide downward. The cross-section of this huge test stone is as flat as a mirror, as if it had been cut by the most delicate tool. Broken. The test stone was cut off. Kozaburo's eyes flashed with unbelievable shock. This moment, he clearly felt that the sword in his hand suddenly became much heavier. Kozaburo's voice was slightly trembling, and he exclaimed as if he couldn't believe his own judgment. This is actually a big sharp knife. A sharp knife made from an iron-level embryo. What a joke. He looked at the test stone that had been cut into two pieces by his own sword. Looking at the famous Dakue Dao level sword in his hand, Kozaburo was completely stunned. He spent his whole life and almost spent his whole life practicing knives. Only then could he create two famous knives at the level of fast knives. And when Ning Chuan made a sword for the first time, he made a big and sharp sword. The material used is still an iron-level sword embryo. Look at the big sharp knife in his hand. It gave Kozaburo a strange feeling that he had been living like a dog for decades. Number 1. the first time you made a sword, you made a big sharp knife. You kid, you went from a newbie to a great swordsmith. After a long silence, the way Kozaburo looked at Ningchuan was like looking at an alien. It's just so. I always learn things very quickly. Looking at Ningchuan's stinking fart, Kozaburo wanted to scold him, but he couldn't find a reason. After all, this kid is now in the sword-making profession, and he is a great master exactly like himself. What's more, he is already old. Over the years, he has also felt that he has reached a point where he can't make any progress. But Ningchuan is different. He is young and has unlimited possibilities in the future. Maybe in the future he will be able to create a supremely sharp sword and be promoted to a legendary swordsmith. When that time comes, stop scolding him. I'm afraid that if it weren't for me, I would still serve him tea and water, and ask him to teach me how to make swords. Although saying this is somewhat contrary to Tiangong. But the swordsmith's journey is actually the same as the swordsman's journey, both emphasize respecting those who have mastered it. After all, there are only a few legendary swordsmiths from hundreds of years ago to now. Every time a legendary swordsmith emerges, it will surely stir up an era. Ningchuan smiled and took the first knife he forged from Kozaburo's hand, and said with a smile. Old man, I've never heard of a saying. That is, if an ordinary sharp sword undergoes long-term nourishment of domineering and the baptism of constant fighting, it is possible to transform into a supreme sharp sword. I heard Ningchuan mention this matter. Kozaburo hesitated for a moment and nodded. You were right. An ordinary sharp sword is qualified to transform under the long-term nourishment of domineering energy. But with so many sharp swords, how many can truly transform into the supreme sharp sword? Perhaps only the strongest swordsmen on the sea who use their own domineering power to nourish a sword for decades can make it possible to transform it. Having said this, Kozaburo paused for a moment, then sneered. But if you think about it this way, what if those great swordsmen nourish their domineering power with the supreme sharp sword? Then how terrifying will this knife be in the end? In the legend of the swordsmith, on top of the supreme sword, there is a sword that can surpass the supreme sword. They follow the great swordsmen in constant battles on the sea, and are constantly nourished by the tyrannical aura and the blood of powerful enemies, making them slowly become spiritual. Such a spiritual and supreme sword is the most powerful sword and the ultimate dream of every swordsmith. Speaking of this, Kozaburo's eyes rarely flashed with excitement. Ningchuan could tell when he talked about the ultimate dream of becoming a swordsmith. This old man, who had been half buried in the ground for a long time, has rarely become enthusiastic. You old man, pull him down. You can't make the supreme sharp sword, so don't think about the ultimate dream of a swordsmith. Listening to Ningchuan's mocking words, Kozaburo couldn't help snorting. He looked at Ningchuan and suddenly smiled evilly after a long time. Although I can't achieve my ultimate dream in this life, my apprentice can. You're right, Xiao Ningchuan. Ah, Kozaburo's sudden clipping sound almost made Ningchuan sick. Smelly old man, who is your apprentice? Don't scream. If you keep yelling like this, the hierarchy will be messed up. Besides, who told me to get lost just now? Looking at Kozaburo who suddenly went crazy, Ningchuan couldn't help but laugh and curse. HMPH, if you learn the sword-making skills of Shimotsuki Kozaburo, you will be my apprentice. Still the best apprentice. As for seniority and so on, it doesn't matter. Let's discuss it ourselves. Kozaburo patted Ningchuan's shoulder very affectionately and insisted on getting closer. For this stinky old man who has a face as thick as a city wall and insists on being his master. Ningchuan really felt helpless towards him. Forget it, let's do this. If you really want to be my master, that's not impossible. As soon as Ningchuan let go, Kozaburo knew that this matter still needed to be discussed. Your 20 sword embryos should be considered as an apprenticeship gift to me. What do you think? As soon as Ningchuan's words came out, Kozaburo's expression suddenly became strange. Isn't the apprenticeship ceremony given by the apprentice to the master? How come it's the other way around when I get to you? After Kozaburo muttered a few words, he suddenly patted his head and said seriously. Forget it, let's not talk about useless things between us. Anyway, these 20 sword embryos in my hand are only at the level of a good sharp sword. If they break the sky, they are just a big sharp sword. I might as well leave them all to you for forging. Maybe you kid can actually create a miracle and build a supremely sharp knife. The words fell. Kozaburo ran directly over and hugged the sword embryos, and came to Ning Chuan's side. Come, good disciple, these are all yours. Go ahead and practice it. Master will buy it for you after you fail it. Ning Chuan, looking at Kozaburo who suddenly became so enthusiastic. Ning Chuan really couldn't adapt to it for a while. Do you still want this broken weapon? After Kozaburo put away the 19 handfuls of embryos, he took out the sword embryo that he had just forged and broke and said in embarrassment. Ning Chuan took the sword embryo from Kozaburo's hand. He silently recited the cultivation settlement in his heart. After the cultivation level just returned from the forged sword arrives, only then did he look at the sword embryo that Kozaburo had broken. The damage is quite serious. It can only reach the level of a sharp knife at most. Hearing Ning Chuan's words, Kozaburo was shocked. What? Can this thing reach the level of a sharp knife? Is this a joke? Ning Chuan rolled his eyes at him, carefully checked the sword embryo again, and said something that almost scared Kozaburo to death. It's not impossible to use the supreme sharp sword. After disassembling and reorganizing this sword embryo, it should be able to return to its original shape. Kozaburo's eyes widened with a puzzled expression on his face. What the hell? Decomposition and reorganization. What kind of technique is this? I remember I never taught you this. Ning Chuan ignored Kozaburo who was startled next to him. He directly picked up the broken sword embryo in his hand and silently activated his ability to split into pieces. The next moment, a scene that shocked Kozaburo's jaw happened. I saw that the sword embryo in Ning Chuan's hand turned into countless tiny pieces in an instant. These fragments are constantly changing and changing under Ning Chuan's control. Finally, it slowly came back together to form a new sword embryo. Sure enough, the ability to fall apart can also be used in sword making. He looked at the sword embryo that had become a little smaller after removing the unusable parts in his hand. The corners of Ning Chuan's mouth raised slightly. Now that the ability to fall apart has been tested, it can be used in sword making. Then let's improve my sword making skills again. Split each part and then recast it. The supreme sharp sword will surely succeed. Kozaburo's eyes followed Ning Chuan's every move. After seeing with my own eyes the sword embryo that had been refined to waste. Under Ning Chuan's operation, it miraculously split and reorganized, and the damaged areas were accurately removed. His shock was beyond words. This operation is beyond the rules of the world and can only be accomplished by those with devil fruit abilities. This kid is actually a devil fruit user. And his ability seems to be related to division. Kozaburo quickly made a judgment in his mind. Etc. The ability to split fruits. He suddenly remembered a piece of news he had read in the newspaper a few days ago. Just a few days ago, a Draco fleet was attacked in the East China Sea. The attacker seems to have the ability to break things into pieces. Although the murderer has been found, he is a guy with the appearance of a clown with a red nose. But for some reason, Kozaburo suddenly felt that this boy Ning Chuan seemed to have something to do with the attack on the Tianlong people. This kid isn't that brave, is he? Thinking of this, Kozaburo suddenly shook his head crazily. It seems that I want to get rid of all these bad thoughts in my mind. Whatever. Anyway, it's the red-nosed guy that Marine and the world government want, and he's not my good disciple. It doesn't count if you're not wanted. No, even if he is wanted, it is still false. At this time, Kozaburo had already made a decision in his heart. Even if one day Ning Chuan is really wanted by the world government, then he must try his best to save Ning Chuan. After all, this is a good prospect of the legendary swordsmith, and it can't be ruined like this. Ning Chuan ignored Kozaburo who was thinking wildly. Instead, he picked up the sword embryo in his hand and came to the vicinity of the magma, preparing to start a new round of sword making. Ning Chuan stood by the magma pool very calmly and silently activated his ability. The next moment, the sword embryo in his hand seemed to be alive. Under the influence of his ability to disintegrate, it instantly split into countless tiny fragments. This scene made Kozaburo standing aside stunned. He found himself witnessing the birth of an unprecedented sword-making technique. If successful, this technique may go down in history. And as the first witness of this kind of swordsmanship. Naturally, Kozaburo's eyes widened and he didn't dare to move, for fear of missing any details. Ning Chuan's movements did not stop. As he thought, the fragments of the sword embryo suspended in the air began to fall into the hot magma one by one. The magma below the sword-making platform instantly enveloped every fragment that entered it. Ning Chuan's eyes were fixed on this process. After all the fragments fell into the magma, he began to precisely control the temperature of the magma that each sword embryo came into contact with. Ensure that every part of the entire sword can obtain the best forging effect at the most suitable temperature. Not enough. Look at the fragments wrapped in magma. Ning Chuan suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He directly further displayed his abilities. He pressed his hand into the magma and used his ability to break apart. The next moment, countless small groups of magma suddenly split out of these magma. Under Ning Chuan's control, countless small groups of magma gradually flowed at high speed between the fragments of the sword embryo. These high-speed flowing magma masses replaced Ning Chuan's manual beating. Instead, they are forging the sword embryo in another way. As the magma mass shuttles back and forth among the fragments of the sword embryo, every flow is a forging and strengthening of the sword embryo. This new forging method directly opened the eyes of Kozaburo, standing aside. He never thought that swords could be made in this way. System, settlement, system, continues settlement. Under Ning Chuan's settlement, relying on the system to return his skills in sword making. This new sword making method created by Ning Chuan continues to mature. Half an hour later, when all the pieces merge again, a brand new dark red long sword, replacing the previous sword embryo, appeared in front of the two of them. When this newly forged long sword appeared for an instant, there seemed to be a sharp energy coming from this sword, which instantly filled the entire sword-making room. Ning Chuan and Kozaburo felt an inexplicable chill coming from this sword almost at the same time. Look at the winding dark red lines on the sword. It's like lava constantly surging inside the sword. When the sun shines on the blade of this sword, these lines seemed to be alive instantly and started to move continuously. Just looking at it makes you feel in awe. Good sword. Kozaburo stared at this sword for a long time. Suddenly he roared, his face full of excitement. He has been making swords all his life, so he is naturally very sensitive to the quality of swords. For some reason, he suddenly had a premonition. That is this sword, it should have reached the point where I have been pursuing the supreme sharp sword my whole life. Ning Chuan also stared at the sword. However, compared to Kozaburo, his expression was much calmer. The moment when all the pieces of the sword come together, he had already felt the terrifying power contained in this sword. If he guessed correctly, this should be the special power quenched by lava. Ning Chuan held his hand on the sword. A little bit of domineering was put into it. The next moment, he only felt a hot wave of heat coming from his hand. However, this heat wave did not burn to Ning Chuan, but spread to all directions. No, the supreme sharp knife. This must be a supremely sharp knife. I feel it, this is the power of lava. It is the unique power when the supreme sword was born. Kozaburo was forced to use his armed haki by this scalding heat wave. I yelled excitedly again. The supreme sharp knife. Good. Then follow the template of this sword and forge all the remaining 19 sword embryos. After saying that, Ning Chuan directly removed the domineering force he had exerted on his sword. Like throwing away garbage, he threw the long sword in his hand to Kozaburo beside him. My little ancestor, this is the supreme sharp sword, the supreme sharp sword. How could you be so embarrassed? What a waste of natural resources, you are such a waste of natural resources. Kozaburo went crazy and caught the extremely sharp knife thrown by Ning Chuan as fast as he could. It was like seeing the most precious thing in the world, holding it in my arms and rubbing it with my hands. Even though his hand had been cut numerous times by the sword blade, he didn't care. Looking at Kozaburo, who has gone completely crazy, Ning Chuan rolled his eyes helplessly and ignored the old guy. Instead, he focused all his attention on the remaining 19 sword embryos. As a similar process begins again. This time, all 19 sword embryos became fragments and began to receive the baptism of magma. Half an hour later, there was a dinging bell clanging sound. 19 long swords with the same appearance and the supreme sharp sword level. It just fell from the air to the ground. Kozaburo, who was awakened by the movement, just glanced at these long swords. His whole vision went dark instantly. Holding the supreme sharp knife in his hand, he completely fainted. Before he fainted, there was only one broken sentence left in his mind. Are they all supreme sharp knives? You're in the wholesale business. Looking at Kozaburo, who had fainted, Ning Chuan stepped forward and checked his breathing, and found that he was fine. It should be that he fainted due to excessive excitement after seeing too many supreme swords. You should be able to wake up after taking some time to relax. Ning Chuan can quite understand him. After all, he has been making swords all his life, but he has never made a supremely sharp sword. And now I have made 19 of them in one batch. Each one is the ultimate sharp knife that he has been pursuing all his life. With such a huge gap, if Kozaburo just fainted, he was already in good health. It's okay to faint. If this old man knows what I want to do next, I'm afraid he will be scared to death, right? Ning Chuan glanced at Kozaburo, who was lying motionless on the ground, and then walked directly towards the 19 supreme sharp knives of the same style. Beyond the supreme sharp sword, there is also a swordsmith's ultimate dream. But from what Kozaburo said, it seems to be a spiritual weapon. Spiritual weapons, couldn't they be the spiritual treasures often mentioned in those immortal novels? Thinking of this, Ning Chuan couldn't help but feel something in his heart. If it is really such a magical thing, that would be interesting. How about, try practicing? Ning Chuan couldn't help but feel a little curious. However, before he started refining spiritual weapons, don't forget to settle the refining process just now. System, start settlement. Congratulations to host for successfully refining 19 supreme sharp knives and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully receiving a refund of the cultivation level of 190,000 supreme sharp knives. Host's sword-making skills have achieved a revolutionary breakthrough. He heard the voice in his mind that the return of cultivation had arrived. Ning Chuan now had a new understanding of the process of making swords. Perhaps spiritual weapons don't have to be nourished with domineering energy and the blood of enemies. It's also possible to make swords. Thinking of this, a look of confidence flashed across Ning Chuan's face. I saw him casually picking up 10 supreme sharp knives of the same style on the ground. He walked towards the sword-making platform again. This time he wants to make a big bet. Just use these 10 supreme sharp knives as sword embryos to create a weapon that is inherently spiritual. Arriving at the sword-making platform, Ning Chuan raised 10 supreme sharp knives of the same style in his hands. Following his thoughts, these 10 supreme swords will make countless swordsmen in the sea go crazy. Instantly turned into thousands of fragments by his ability to disintegrate. If those swordsmen saw that Ning Chuan was forging swords with the supreme sharp sword, I'm afraid I would have to risk my life to stop him from such a wasteful act. Watch the fragments of these supremely sharp knives flying in the air. Ning Chuan took a deep breath and began to mobilize the surrounding lava. He wants to use the supreme sharp sword as the basis and take away the best part of these supreme sharp swords. Come and forge an unprecedented sword. Countless fragments of the supreme sharp knife were quickly surrounded by magma with terrifyingly high temperatures. Under the constant melting of high temperature. 3 hours later. As these fragments continue to melt, only the purest and toughest essence remains. Look at the remaining essence of the 10 supreme sharp knives. A satisfied smile gradually appeared on Ning Chuan's face. Not bad, just enough material for a sword. Looking at these essential parts, Ning Chuan began to control them to slowly come together. Let these essence parts be reborn into a brand new long sword. Slowly, the prototype of an ancient dragon sword appeared in front of Ning Chuan. This sword is Ning Chuan's favorite work and will become his main weapon in the future. So the shape of the sword and so on were all molded into his favorite style. As the long sword gradually revealed its true form in the air, a tyrannical force spread directly from the long sword towards the entire island. This is the sword intention, the tyrannical sword intention born from the moment the long sword was born. At this time, Koshiro was teaching the students in the gym. Suddenly, a terrifying sword intent that was extremely powerful and far beyond what he knew, swept right past him. Koshiro was shocked. As this sword intention, Koshiro turned his head to look at the back mountain in shock. He could feel that this sword intent was emanating from the place where the sword was made in the back mountain. Is it the supreme sharp knife? Father, is he done? With this question, Koshiro immediately put down his work and started running towards the back mountain. He wanted to witness this miracle with his own eyes. Except him, Kuina and Zoro are the two strongest students in the gym. Naturally, he also felt this powerful and terrifying sword intent. However, their strength is really too weak. When this sword intent swept across, they couldn't even hold the swords in their hands. At this time, in the sword-making room, Ning Chuan looked at the long sword floating in the air that had been releasing terrifying sword intent, with a satisfied smile on his face. He was about to reach out and grasp the hilt of the sword. However, this sword seemed to have a temper. It avoided Ning Chuan's hand and turned to the side. Interesting, this sword is really spiritual. Ning Chuan sneered, and then instantly released his sword intent. He began to fight against this long sword. As Ning Chuan's sword intent became stronger and stronger, this long sword gradually became unable to withstand Ning Chuan's oppression. Just when Ning Chuan was about to put his hand on the long sword, the next moment, this sword actually penetrated directly through the door of the sword-making room and flew out from inside. Still want to run? Looking at the long sword flying out, Ning Chuan sneered and immediately chased him away from where he was. The moment he came outside, Ning Chuan made an unexpected discovery. This sword is made outdoors. The originally clear sky suddenly became covered with dark clouds at this moment. Waves of terrifying thunder power surged between the dark clouds, and the long sword flew out of the sword-making room. At this moment, it stopped in midair, and the sword trembled slightly, as if it was afraid of something. Good guy, it turns out that everything written in those fantasy novels is true. As soon as a spiritual weapon is born, it will be struck by lightning. Tisk, tisk, I want you not to let Lousy hold it. Is that okay now? You can be struck by lightning. Looking at the long sword trembling in midair, Ning Chuan sneered angrily. Boom! As a bolt of lightning pierced the sky, the roaring thunder instantly hit the reborn sword. Just when Ning Chuan thought that the sword would become honest if it was struck by lightning, suddenly, a terrifying hot breath came out of the sword. That's the power of lava. It is using the lava power contained in the sword to fight against the thunder falling from the sky. After successfully resisting the first thunderbolt, Ning Chuan discovered that the sword's momentum had become much smaller than before. It seems that resisting a thunderstorm has put a lot of effort on it. Boom! Just when Ning Chuan thought that after the thunder just passed, these dark clouds were about to dissipate, suddenly, the second, third lines of terrifying lightning began to fall from the sky towards the sword. However, this sword seems to have anticipated the arrival of these thunders. It did not flinch, but pointed the sword tip upward, constantly releasing the terrifying power of lava. It seems that he wants to compete with this thunder. Boom, boom, as several thunderbolts fell from the sky one after another. Not only did each lightning strike not destroy the long sword, but it made the sword shine even more dazzlingly. This moment, it was as if the tyrannical energy between heaven and earth was pouring into this sword. Let it become more perfect and more tyrannical in the roar of thunder again and again. Wait until the thunder subsides and the dark clouds disperse. This long sword that had experienced a thunderstorm slowly fell from the air to not far in front of Ning Chuan. Ning Chuan no longer hesitated, stepped forward and used his strongest strength to grasp the hilt of the sword. The moment his hand grasped the hilt of the sword, Ning Chuan immediately felt the two terrifying powers contained in this sword. One is its own lava power, and the other is the thunder power with some destructive meaning. This sword actually absorbed all the power of the thunder just now. A sword with the power of lava and thunder. I'll call you Thunder Fire Sword from now on. Ning Chuan firmly held the Thunder Fire Sword in his hand. You can feel that it has been struggling in your hands. It seems that he doesn't want to be controlled by others. But no matter how hard the Thunder Fire Sword struggled, it could not escape the control of Ning Chuan's hand. Gradually, you may feel that you cannot break free from the constraints. The sword also began to gradually become quieter. What's wrong? What happened? Koshiro, who hurried over, looked at the novel long sword in Ning Chuan's hand. I couldn't help but asked curiously. No big deal, just forging a sword. Ning Chuan stroked the thunder fire sword in his hand. Put it into the scabbard prepared in advance. However, the moment the sword was stuffed into the scabbard by Ning Chuan, a force of thunder and magma burst out from the sword almost simultaneously. The scabbard prepared by Ning Chuan was instantly blown to pieces. You have a pretty bad temper, don't you? Looking at the thunder fire sword that did not want to be put into the scabbard, Ning Chuan snorted coldly, covered his hand with armed domineering energy, and slapped the sword with his palm. Bang! After a crisp sound, the entire blade of this long sword, which seemed to have quite a bad temper, started to tremble slightly. It seemed to be afraid that Ning Chuan would continue to slap it with a big slap. If you don't want to put the sword into the scabbard, then just float it by yourself. If you dare to run around again, I will break you into pieces and reforge you. Under the threat of Ning Chuan, the sword actually shook the tip of the sword in an extremely humane manner, as if it was nodding and bowing towards Ning Chuan. This scene before my eyes. Koshiro was immediately stunned. You are talking to a sword. This sword still responds to you. Oh my god, are you crazy or am I crazy? Look at Koshiro's jaw dropped to the ground in shock. Ning Chuan thought for a while, stretched out a foot and stepped on Koshiro's feet hard. Ah, are you crazy? Why are you stepping on me? Although Ning Chuan's kick only used 5 points of strength, but Koshiro still screamed when he was stepped on. Look, Mr. Koshiro, I'm not crazy, so you are probably crazy. A smirk appeared on Ning Chuan's face. It was quite interesting for Koshiro to take the opportunity to do this for a while. Koshiro held his feet and jumped in place for a while. In the end, Ning Chuan's attention was attracted by the sword floating behind his back. I can't even feel the pain in my feet anymore. What happened to the sword behind your back? Why can it fly in the sky? Returning to the previous topic, Koshiro had more doubts than before. That is a sword that surpasses the supreme sharp sword and has spirituality. He fulfilled every swordsmith's ultimate dream. Ning Chuan didn't have time to answer. An old but extremely excited voice sounded directly behind the two of them. Kozaburo didn't know when he woke up. Carrying the remaining 10 supreme sharp knives, he came to the two of them. A swordsmith's ultimate dream. It's difficult, Dad, are all the things you told me before true? Is there really such a spiritual weapon in this world? Looking at the sword floating behind Ning Chuan, he recalled the legend his father once told him about the swordsmith's ultimate dream. The expression on Koshiro's face gradually became more and more exaggerated and unbelievable. This is less than a day. Ning Chuan has already realized the ultimate dream of a swordsmith. This guy's talent in sword making is a bit exaggerated, right? Even stronger than his talent in kendo. Son, these are all works by Master Ning Chuan. All of them are supremely sharp knives. Kozaburo displayed the 10 supreme sharp swords in front of Koshiro's eyes. This moment, when he mentioned Ning Chuan, I don't know why, but there was a little fanaticism in his words. At this time, in his eyes. No, it should be said that it is in the eyes of every swordsmith. Ning Chuan has become a godlike existence. A total of 20 sharp sword embryos. 10 supreme sharp knives are released, and 1 ultimate blade surpasses the supreme sharp sword. Ning Chuan, Master Ning Chuan, how about, you accept me as your disciple? I'll learn to make swords with you. Ning Chuan. Koshiro, looking at his father's enthusiasm at this moment. Koshiro felt confused. Dad, don't you dare say nonsense. What will happen to me if you become his apprentice? What will Kuina do in the future? At this age, you can't just mess around. The three of them returned to the gym. Looking at the 10 supreme sharp knives of the same style placed in front of him. Without any hesitation, he directly pulled out 2 handfuls and handed them to Kozaburo and his son respectively. These 2 supremely sharp knives, one is used as an additional fee for me to come to Shimotsuki village to study, and the other is used as compensation for the trouble I caused you after I took Kuina away. Kozaburo and his son took the sword, and their expressions looked very excited at this time. You must know that this is the legendary supreme sharp knife. This is a sword that can make every swordsman in the sea go crazy. Before today, there were only 12 in the entire sea. But now, it's like cabbage in Ning Chuan's hands. It was delivered as soon as I said it would be delivered. This made Kozaburo and his son feel a surge of emotion in their hearts. So this knife is Kuina's gift. Son, why don't you accept it quickly? Kozaburo touched the supreme sharp knife with dark red knife patterns in his hand and joked to the side. Daddy, I didn't say I wanted to marry Kuina. Kuina is just going to sea with them to get some experience. What are you thinking? Koshiro took the sword in his hand and roared at Kozaburo. Tisk, tisk, what a duplicitous guy. Maybe when they come back from their experience, you will have grandchildren. Ningchuan, Koshiro. Seeing Kozaburo who was joking endlessly, Ningchuan quickly changed the subject to prevent him from continuing to mess around on this issue. Cough. Senior Kozaburo, I think it's better to keep these jokes to a minimum. By the way, there is still this sword. From now on, you can help me leave it to Zoro. I will give it to him when he practices for a few more years and goes to sea. Ningchuan took out another supremely sharp knife and asked them to hand it to Zoro for him. For Zoro, Koshiro took another supremely sharp knife from Ningchuan and looked at him with some confusion. Yes, this guy has a pretty good talent. He must have a place among the great swordsmen of the future. Just think of it as an investment in him. Anyway, this guy is practicing the three-sword style and is missing a lot of swords. After explaining these things, Ningchuan stood up directly, looked at Kozaburo and Koshiro and said seriously. Two seniors, since I have mastered both swordsmanship and sword-making skills. Then it's time to say goodbye. Kuina, I will protect her, you don't have to worry. Listening to what Ningchuan said, Kozaburo and his son naturally knew what Ningchuan meant. How about staying here for a few more days? Koshiro was a little surprised by Ningchuan's sudden departure. He also wanted his daughter to stay at home for a few more days. No, there is still a promise in the sea waiting for me to fulfill. That's it, let's go. Chapter 51. Kuina, don't you take another look at Shimotsuki village. Ningchuan walked onto the deck and looked at Kuina who was practicing hard on the bow of the ship with her sword raised and asked. Stop watching. When we become famous, let's come back. By then, I will definitely be able to become a female great swordsman. Kuina didn't look back and her tone was very firm. In that case, Nami, Nokigao. Let's sail the boat. As Ningchuan's voice fell, Nami and Nuochigao directly opened the sail and sailed towards the depths of the sea. Kozaburo and his son on the shore looked at the boat of Ningchuan and the four of them, with a hint of worry in their eyes. But soon, this trace of worry disappeared. The two of them believed that Ningchuan was there. He will definitely take care of Kuina's safety. Zoro on the side looked at the direction Ningchuan and the others were leaving at this moment, clenching his fists. Kuina, Ningchuan, when I go to sea, I will definitely become a world-famous swordsman. I will even surpass you and become the strongest swordsman in the world. Mr. Seagull, bring me a newspaper. Ningchuan threw the prepared 1,000 baileys to the seagull delivering the newspaper. Because Ningchuan is generous, he can get a lot of tips from him to buy French fries. So these seagulls like to come and deliver newspapers to him. Ningchuan took the newspaper and scanned it, and instantly found some news that interested him. I didn't expect this incident to be so big. Even the guys in New World were alarmed. I read in the newspaper that someone had witnessed many New World 4 Emperor's ships. Ningchuan knew about Marine's encirclement and suppression of Buggy this time. They also want to intervene. After all, Buggy is the first ruthless person who dares to kill a celestial dragon. New World's 4 Emperors group has paid attention to him, and it seems reasonable to want to take him under their wing to increase their reputation. However, the ships of the other 4 Emperors have all appeared in the East China Sea. But there seems to be no news about Whitebeard's fleet here. It seems that Whitebeard is not interested in Buggy. Thinking of this, Ningchuan couldn't help but shook his head. If Whitebeard wants to join in the fun this time, then he might be able to successfully obtain the shock fruit and the fruit ability of Marcos Phoenix Phantasmal Beast. These are two very powerful abilities. No less than the ability to fall apart that I have mastered. Marine's lineup is also quite luxurious. I didn't expect that the old guy from the Warring States period actually came out in person, bringing with him the two generals Akainu and Aokiji. If I'm lucky, maybe I can get the fruit abilities of these 3 people. The excitement this time is really interesting. Just when Ning Chuan was sighing that several people were going to participate in this rare lively scene, suddenly a pirate ship flew the mammoth pirate flag. It was constantly breaking through the waves and rushing towards the four-person boat. Boss, the ship in front doesn't seem to be a pirate ship. The flag above is very strange. It seems to be the portraits of 4 children. Should we still bump into each other? The beast pirates, Drought Jack, one of the 3 major disasters. After hearing the news reported by his subordinates, a cruel look appeared on his face. What about children? Any ship that dares to block the route of our beast pirates, no one can be left alive. Even if it is the Marine Fleet Admiral's ship, the ship must move over and crush them, Jack ordered. His minions didn't dare to disobey Jack's will. He immediately started to accelerate and crashed into Ningchuan's boat. Several people in Ningchuan at this time. Naturally, they also noticed a giant ship in the distance that was accelerating and crashing into their location. Ningchuan, the giant pirate ship over there is so fast that we can't seem to avoid it. If we collide with such a big ship, we may be smashed into pieces. We must respond in advance. After Nami took a telescope and observed it carefully, she calmly reminded Ning Chuan. Both Kuina and Nokigao heard Nami's voice. The 2 of them took turns taking the telescope from Nami's hand. I saw the giant pirate ship that Drought Jack was on. Is that the flag of the beast pirates? The people on that ship must be the New World 4 emperors, men, right? Nokigao carefully studied the flags of the famous pirate groups on the sea. She immediately recognized this pirate ship as one of Kaido's officers from the 4 emperors. Nokigao quickly took out a stack of wanted posters from the world government that she had collected. I quickly searched inside. After a while, she pulled out a wanted poster with Jack's face on it. He handed it to Ning Chuan with an excited look and analyzed it at the same time. It's one of Kaido's 3 major signboards, Drought Jack. Bounty, 1 billion Baileys. According to the information I collected, someone in the New World once offered 900 million berries to buy Jack's pair of ivory. If we capture all his ships, we can get at least 2 billion belly in return. After listening to Nokigao's analysis, Ning Chuan smiled and rubbed her head. Well done, we're going to make a small fortune this time. Kuina, who had just boarded the ship, heard what Nami and Nokigao said. I couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Well, that's the pirate ship of Drought Jack, one of the 3 disasters under the 4 emperors. Ning Chuan, you actually want to attack him? I know you are very strong now and have become a swordsman, but he is Drought Jack after all. I heard my grandpa say that Jack's strength. Lena hasn't finished her worried words yet. Ning Chuan's fingers were placed on her mouth. Rest assured. It's just a minor disaster, it won't cause any trouble. What's more, they are coming for us. If Bailey doesn't want this delivered to our door, he will be punished by God. Finished. Under Kuina's worried eyes, Ning Chuan hooked his hand behind him. Then, there was a swish sound. A sword shadow instantly flew in front of the 4 people. Thunder Fire Sword, go. Cut down that ship and bring me the ivory. Ning Chuan finished speaking. He directly activated his armed domineering energy and poured a large amount of it into the blade of the Thunder Fire Sword. Nourished by Ning Chuan's domineering energy. The next moment, the 2 extremely powerful forces of thunder and lava suddenly flowed on the entire sword. The naturally terrifying sword intent was also spreading from Ning Chuan's boat to the surroundings at this moment. Kuina, who felt this power, was naturally shocked. It turns out that the Thunder Fire Sword is so powerful. Kuina's sigh has just fallen. Thunder Fire Sword seemed to want to show off in front of her. He flew out from the spot instantly. He slashed at the giant pirate ship that was attacking everyone. Drought Jack's pirate ship. An experienced lookout was holding a telescope, ready to take a look at the unlucky guy who was about to be crushed by their ship. Just when he picked up the telescope and nervously observed Ning Chuan and his boat in the distance, suddenly, his eyes widened. I couldn't believe what I saw. I saw a sword emitting a strange light, speeding towards them at an unimaginable speed. Report, Captain. There is an unknown object flying towards us. It looks like a sword. Jack raised his eyebrows when he heard this. A sword. Hearing what his men said, he immediately stepped onto the bow. For the first time, he saw a flying sword moving at high speed rushing towards his big ship. HMPH, interesting. A sword that can fly by itself. I have never seen such a magical thing in the new world. Take it back and give it to the boss. With this in mind, Jack strode to the deck. He was thinking in his mind about how to get this mysterious sword into his bag. Just when he was thinking about how to intercept this flying sword, an unexpected scene happened to him. The flying sword actually stopped less than a kilometer away from the front of their ship. Instead of continuing to charge forward, the entire sword suddenly stood up, with the tip pointing upward. He aimed his sword at Jack's ship. Seeing this scene, the surrounding air seemed to solidify at this moment. As one of the 3 major poster boards of the Beast Pirates, Jack has experienced many battles and has extremely rich combat experience. By this time, he could naturally see that the sword seemed to come from an evil source. Back off, all of you, get behind me. In this flash of lightning, Drought Jack's intuition was as sharp as a beast. He caught a trace of the ominous aura coming from the Thunderfire sword. This sense of crisis spread very quickly. From the beginning, it quickly enveloped his entire heart. This 4 Emperors leader has been on the verge of life and death countless times. For the first time, when facing an inanimate weapon, I felt an unprecedented sense of oppression. We can't wait any longer, we have to transform. There was no hesitation. Jack immediately mobilized the ancient mammoth fruit ability in his body. Roar! Along with a deafening roar, Jack's body expanded rapidly. In an instant, he transformed into a huge mammoth, standing on the bow of the ship. The pair of ivory tusks that were several meters long were shining with a cold light at this moment. I am afraid that countless enemies have died under his pair of terrifying tusks. Thunderfire sword seemed to be very contemptuous of Jack's transformation. But when it looked at Jack's pair of huge tusks, it actually shook its sword curiously. It seems to have remembered the mission given to it by Ningchuan, to bring the ivory back. Then the sword intent of the entire sword began to become more intense. The power of thunder and lava on the Thunderfire sword are intertwined. These 2 most primitive and pure powers between heaven and earth are blended together at this moment. As the power on the sword continued to gather, the surrounding air gradually began to distort. The waves on the sea surface also seemed to be trembling, and the entire sea area seemed to be trembling at this moment. When the time is right, the Thunderfire sword will no longer hesitate. The moment Jack and his ship just entered its attack range, the Thunderfire sword struck a fatal blow at their ship. I saw a flash of sword light, carrying the force of thunder and the burning heat of boiling lava, piercing the sky. Go straight to the giant pirate ship where Jack is. At this moment, Jack felt an unprecedented pressure. He had only experienced such terrifying pressure from his boss, Kaido. It's just a sword. How can it turn your world upside down? Fight with you. Roar. Jack, who transformed into a mammoth, roared angrily and used his domineering power to the extreme. He drove the mammoth's giant body and covered his strongest trunk and tusks with domineering energy. To resist this terrifying force that can shake the world. As the captain, he had already seen it. This sword is not only aimed at him, but also at their ship. As the captain, he must block this blow for everyone. With a powerful blow from the Thunderfire sword, it slashed out. Jack desperately tried his best to block the front of the entire ship. However, even the tyrannical ancient species of mammoth, under the powerful blow of the Thunderfire sword, his defense was instantly broken. The 2 huge tusks and the long trunk were broken by this blow. There was also a huge slash mark on Jack's head, which was so deep that the bones were visible. I can't stop it. If you hold on any longer, you will die. At this time, the blood on Jack's body continued to spurt out like a fountain. He only resisted the sword energy for less than a second. He couldn't hold it anymore. Jack knew that if he continued to block like this, he would definitely be split in 2 by the terrifying sword energy. In desperation, he had no choice but to use all his strength and pay the price of an arm before moving his body to the side. Without Jack's resistance in front, the next moment, the entire sword energy instantly cut through the giant pirate ship he was driving. The power of thunder and lava suddenly burst out at this moment. The entire ship was directly wiped out in this terrifying blow. Boom! There was a loud noise. In the distance, 4 people from Ningchuan stood on their boat. I saw very clearly the scene where Jack and his giant pirate ship exploded. Yeah, Thunderfire sword is awesome. Crisis averted. Nami looked at the exploding pirate ship and laughed happily. Haha, another 1 billion Bailey has arrived. Ningchuan, our debt to Lieutenant General Garp is already 1/3. Nochigao took out his own notebook for accounting and wrote in it. At this moment, there is only Kuina who has just boarded the ship. He was looking blankly at the giant pirate ship in front of him that was exploded by the Thunderfire sword. These are Kaido's cadres. He was killed with a sword just like that. I remember my grandpa once said that Kaido and his men are enemies that are difficult to defeat. Otherwise, they would not have been able to leave Wano country back then. And now, Kuina suddenly felt that it seemed that the legendary Four Emperors Kaido and his men were not impossible to defeat. Whoosh, the sound of a long sword cutting through the air suddenly came. Kuina, who was in a sluggish state, suddenly woke up. Look at the two huge mammoth tusks hanging on the Thunderfire sword. Ning Chuan smiled and nodded. Thunderfire sword is quite sensible. The tusks are not damaged, well done. The Thunderfire sword, which Ning Chuan had praised so much, suddenly started to sway in the sky. It can be seen that it is very happy. Now that I have got the ivory back, I have another task for you. Go and fish out all the drowned dogs that just fell into the sea. After receiving Ning Chuan's new order, although Thunderfire sword showed some reluctance, but seeing that Ning Chuan had just injected a lot of domineering energy into it, it still rushed out of the place in an instant. He began to act according to Ning Chuan's instructions. Ning Chuan handed the ivory to Nami and the others. Let them see if they can use this thing to carve something fun or sell it. After the shocking blow of the Thunderfire sword, it took a long time for the nearby sea to finally return to its previous calmness. But the sound of rapid swords piercing the air was heard. The calm sea was once again filled with water. Only this time, the Thunderfire sword shuttled across the sea. It was to salvage those pirates who had narrowly escaped the disaster one by one. Send them to Ningchuan's ship one by one so that they can be taken to Garp to offset the debt later. Looking at the pirates being sent to the ship by Luo Huojian, Ning Chuan didn't have any carelessness. Break their limbs immediately and tie them tightly with strong ropes. However, Ning Chuan is a kind-hearted person after all. Throw them overboard. Each man left a piece of driftwood for them so that they could float on the sea for a short time without being drowned by the sea. In this way, even if there are still people with devil fruit abilities hidden among this group of pirates, but once soaked in the sea, none of the fruits will work. With the constant rise and fall of the waves, Drought Jack was in great embarrassment when his shoulder blade was pierced by the Thunderfire sword, and he was brought out of the sea. It seems that Thunderfire sword really dislikes this bulky guy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have struck him with a sword when I pulled him out of the sea. Bang, sound. Drought Jack, who had been soaking in the sea for a long time, fell heavily on the deck of Ningchuan's boat. The whole ship was smashed and swayed again and again on the sea. It took a long time before it returned to calm. This guy is really big. The three Nami people couldn't help but sigh as they looked at Jack, who had smashed the entire ship and rocked it back and forth. A large amount of seawater flowed down Jack's body, revealing a large number of scars. This once arrogant one of the Four Emperors' biggest posters now looks particularly weak. But even though Jack was now seriously injured, there was still a fierce light in his eyes. He looked up at Ning Chuan and the others on the boat. I didn't feel a hint of danger from them. This made Drought Jack, who originally thought he would encounter a powerful opponent, be stunned for a moment. Is there someone else who just attacked us? He saw that I was going to attack these children and that's why he took action. Thinking of this, Jack felt a burst of contempt in his heart. At the same time, a glimmer of hope ignited in my heart. If I capture these children, what can I do to force the person behind them to stop? Can you even seize control of that terrifying sword? This moment, Jack, who has always been short of brains, actually plans to use this last chance to turn defeat into victory. Watching the fierce light in Jack's mind, Ning Chuan couldn't help but sneered. There is only one arm left, and the ivory and trunk have been shaved off. How can this waste still have such thoughts? This guy is really stupid. Just when Jack shook off the water all over his body, he was about to use his remaining strength to launch a surprise attack. Thunderfire sword seemed to be aware of his intention. I saw the blade of the Thunderfire sword shaking slightly, and immediately pointed the tip of the sword at Jack. It is ready to attack at any time to protect Ningchuan and the others. However, Ningchuan reached out to stop the Thunderfire sword at this time. He walked forward slowly, with a deep look in his eyes and a hint of disdain in his tone. Why, do you still want to continue taking action? Then let me play with you. After saying that, Ningchuan waved his hand at the Thunderfire sword, signaling it to retreat. Watching the Thunderfire sword fly into the distance, Jack's eyes began to wander between Ningchuan and the Thunderfire sword behind him, fear and greed intertwined in his heart. A child is just holding a sword. How powerful can he be? Such a close distance is enough to take him down before the sword reacts. If I can get that sword, even if it costs me an arm, it's still a good deal. Gradually, Jack's inner greed gradually took over. Jack simply believed that as long as he defeated this seemingly weak opponent, he could take possession of the mysterious and powerful long sword. No matter what, let's fight. Just as Jack prepares to launch a desperate attack, the sneer on Ningchuan's lips became much worse than before. He didn't say much, and his momentum suddenly rose. The powerful armed domineering force instantly covered the fist. The moment Jack stood up and punched Ningchuan with his huge fist, Ningchuan's fist, filled with armed domineering aura, directly hit Jack's fist. In this punch, Ningchuan controlled some strength. After all, this guy will be useful in the future, just cripple him. Boom! After a deafening loud noise, Jack felt that his vision was darkened. The strength he was so proud of was as fragile as paper under Ningchuan's punch. His fists were smashed into pieces by Ningchuan in an instant. Immediately afterwards, the powerful force on Ningchuan's fist poured into his body along his arms like a torrent. The bones in Jack's body made cracking sounds one after another. The huge pain caused him to instantly lose all ability to resist. Jack fell heavily on the deck, and all his bones were shattered by Ningchuan's punch. The huge pain made even his most basic breathing extremely difficult. At this moment, he could only lie there, unable to move, his eyes full of panic. Before he passed out completely, Jack left his last unwilling words. How can this kid be so strong? One day later, on a vast area of the East China Sea, Ningchuan bought information about where Marines gathered from the messenger seagull. After getting the location where Marine gathered, he no longer hesitated and took Jack directly towards where Marine gathered. The four people drove the boat and sailed on the sea for a long time. Finally, we saw a large number of warships gathering in the distance. Just when they were about to head there directly, suddenly, a Marine warship patrolling the periphery discovered their small boat. The captain of the patrol boat is a young beauty wearing the rank of colonel. She discovered the Ningchuan ship through the telescope, as well as Drought Jack tied up on their boat. As a qualified Marine colonel, Tina basically knows every wanted pirate. She recognized it at a glance, the big guy tied up in Ningchuan's boat. It turned out to be a cadre of the beast pirates who appeared in Marine intelligence not long ago. One of the three major posters under Kaido in Four Emperors, Drought Jack. After seeing this, Tina was stunned on the spot, with disbelief written all over her beautiful face. Isn't it possible? These four kids captured Drought Jack. Without any hesitation, Colonel Tina immediately sent a report to the command ship. Watching the boats coming by, as a Marine with combat experience, Tina still maintained a high degree of vigilance at this time. She was afraid that this was an illusion created by Jack and other pirates. The purpose is to cause some unimaginable trouble to Marine. To be on the safe side, she immediately ordered the warship to turn around and aim its guns at Ningchuan's ships. Order the entire ship to prepare for battle and begin to move forward quickly, preparing to intercept Ningchuan's small boat. As the two ships gradually approached, Ningchuan held Jack's huge body and stood on the bow. His eyes were extremely calm, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Obviously, he has recognized it. The person who came to intercept him was none other than Marine's military beauty, Tina. As the distance shortened, Tina could see the other person's face clearly. It was a young and handsome face with a slightly thin figure. A very sharp contrast to the cargo he was carrying. I am Ningchuan, this is Drought Jack of the Beast Pirates. I have subdued him. I want to see Lieutenant General Garp. Ningchuan's voice was clear and steady. He didn't beat around the bush and explained his purpose directly. I heard Ning Chuan himself say that what he was carrying was Drought Jack. Tina looked in disbelief for a moment. At this moment, she suddenly felt that the scene in front of her was beyond her cognitive scope. Drought Jack. This is Kaido's capable general in the Four Emperors. And now, he was captured by a seemingly ordinary young man. And looking at the injuries on both of them, you can understand that he did not get any benefits from the fight with Ning Chuan. He was completely beaten by Ning Chuan. What was even more difficult for Tina to understand was, the young man also said he wanted to see Lieutenant General Garp. Could it be that he is a disciple trained by Lieutenant General Garp? But why have I never heard him mention it? Although there were many questions in her mind, Tina was stunned for a moment. Still, he quickly regained the calmness that a Marine officer should have. You need to stop the ship for safety inspection first. I need to confirm the authenticity of what you said. Tina looked into Ning Chuan's eyes and closely observed Ning Chuan's every move. Make sure no emergencies occur. Ning Chuan had already been mentally prepared for Tina's request. After all, this is a critical moment. Nothing can go wrong. So Ning Chuan readily agreed and began to cooperate with Marine's inspection procedures. Tina just got on the boat with 4 people in Ningchuan. When she saw that Ningchuan's boat was full of children, she once again showed an expression of disbelief. There is no adult at all, but they are all children. They are a little too outrageous, aren't they? Tina suppressed her shock in her heart. A routine inspection of Ningchuan's ship began. When she reached the railing of the boat, when looking at the ropes tied to the ship and the large number of pirates with familiar faces hanging on the ropes. At this moment, Tina can no longer remain calm. You guys actually destroyed Jack's pirate group. OMG. As a Marine colonel, he naturally knows the terrifying combat power of the Drought Jack Regiment. Ordinary Marine lieutenant generals are probably no match for this guy. But Ningchuan and his 4 children actually did it. This moment, Tina's shock was beyond words. When he looked at Ning Chuan and the others, the shock in his eyes was hard to conceal. I will contact the senior management immediately and report the situation here. How about you wait a moment? As Tina said this, she quickly picked up the phone and started to contact her superiors urgently. Even in the panic, the phone bug in his hand fell on the deck. Miss Tina, there is no need to worry. Ning Chuan smiled and helped Tina pick up the phone bug, and at the same time comforted her. Watch a little kid stay calm at this time. But I was so nervous that I couldn't even hold the phone steady. Tina's face suddenly turned red with embarrassment. No, it's too embarrassing. I am so embarrassed in front of several children. It's really embarrassing. While waiting for a reply from Marine senior management, Ning Chuan stood patiently on the bow of the boat, letting the sea breeze blow through his clothes. Looking at Ning Chuan standing on the bow of the boat, Tina unexpectedly noticed that the little guy's eyes revealed a maturity and calmness beyond his years. It seemed that everything was as he expected. This greatly increased Tina's curiosity about Ning Chuan. She now wants to know more about things related to Ning Chuan. When Colonel Tina's report reached the Warring States Fleet Admiral, instantly, it caused an uproar among the senior executives. Sengoku Fleet Admiral, Aokiji Kuzan, and Akainu Sakazuki are the 3 heavyweights in Marine. After hearing this news, he raised his head almost at the same time, with an incredible light flashing in his eyes. What did you say? 4 kids, caught Drought Jack. There was obvious shock in Sengoku's voice. He rubbed his somewhat swollen temples, trying to make sure that he didn't hear the wrong information because his mind was confused due to busy affairs. Aokiji scratched his curly hair, and his expression became unusually serious. This seems a bit exaggerated, doesn't it? With Jack's strength, even if Lieutenant General Marine takes action, it will be difficult to capture him. What are the backgrounds of these children? Akainu took a long puff of cigar at this time and exhaled streams of smoke. He has always been known for his toughness, but he couldn't help but reveal a bit of curiosity in his words at this moment. Interesting kid, especially this one named Ning Chuan, who can achieve such success at such an age. If he is willing to join Marine, I will take him there myself. Lieutenant General Garp has been drinking tea, eating senbei and listening to what a few people are saying. Until I heard Ningchuan's name from Akainu's mouth. He sat up from the recliner in surprise and couldn't help but look at Zhang Guodao. Warring States, what is the name of the boy you just talked about? Sengoku glanced at Garp, snatched the senbei from his hand, and said dissatisfiedly. Garp, I asked you to participate in the action, not to be lazy. This is something that happened in the East China Sea under your jurisdiction. Why don't you even listen to the information? That boy's name is Ningchuan, Ningchuan. Listening to the roar of the Warring States period, Garp was not only not angry, but immediately burst into laughter. It turns out to be that boy from Ningchuan. His progress is so fast. Now he's so strong that he even captured Kaido's Kadri Drought Jack. Not bad, interesting. After hearing Garp's words, Sengguo and others on the side couldn't help but look at him with doubtful eyes. Garp, do you know that guy? Warring States pushed his eyes and asked in disbelief. Why don't you recognize me? That kid owes me 3 billion worth of wanted money, and now he should be here to pay off the debt. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, the two generals Akainu and Aokiji, and a series of marine executives. When I learned that there seemed to be a very deep relationship between Garp and Ning Chuan. The expressions on their faces can be described as quite weird. They were all shocked that Garp never mentioned it. This is a boy with endless potential. He will at least be a general in the future. Garp just missed this guy. At the same time, each of them began to feel regret in their hearts. Why didn't such a young man with endless potential join Marine earlier and play for Marine? Garp, you old guy, why didn't you tell us about this earlier? This kid with endless potential should be allowed to enter Marine as early as possible for training. Sengoku was the first to break the silence. There was a hint of anger and reproach in his tone. Akainu also showed a hint of dissatisfaction in his eyes. For a talent like Ning Chuan who started fighting pirates at such an early age. Not entering the Marine system in time and becoming a Marine officer was obviously unacceptable to him. If such a little guy had come to Marine earlier, his achievements would already be rated as an admiral. Aokiji Kuzan seemed relatively calm. He's been on the Garp boat for so long. Naturally, we know that Garp had his reasons for not recruiting Ning Chuan to Marine. He looked at Garp, thought for a moment and then started to help Garp. Everyone, I guess Lieutenant General Garp has invited Ning Chuan, right? Maybe that kid is not willing. Faced with everyone's doubts, I heard that Aokiji was willing to excuse himself. Garp's helpless old face showed a rare hint of relief. He looked at everyone, spread his hands helplessly, and explained with a wry smile. I've tried it a long time ago, but this guy is very stubborn and won't join Marine no matter what. He has his own dreams to realize. As soon as I hear the word dream, everyone present focused their attention on Garp. After all, they know it. Those guys who are related to Garp. Their dreams are naturally quite scary. Just like his son, Monkey D. Long. Ha ha ha, why are everyone looking at me like that? Looking at Garp, who looked honest, Zhengguo was silent for a long time and suddenly spoke. Garp, please tell the truth. This boy named Ning Chuan, is his dream normal? After listening to Garp's explanation, the atmosphere in the conference room finally relaxed a little. Well, the dream is not to do those scary things. Warring States couldn't help but wipe the sweat from his forehead. After all, if a guy who has been able to take down the 4 emperors' cadres since he was young has the same dream as a rebel like Long and wants to overthrow the world government. That's really scary. If that's the case, then I'll try to recruit Ning Chuan myself. Then no matter how much it costs, we must win him over. After hearing what Warring States said, all the senior executives in the conference room nodded in agreement. If we can really win over Ning Chuan, then Marine will have a very strong combat power in the future. With Ning Chuan's current achievements, no one will doubt that his strength will not be at the top of the world in the future. When Ning Chuan received an invitation from Marine's senior management, he was about to go to Marine's temporary conference room. In order to avoid attracting too much attention, he did not bring the eye-catching thunder fire sword. At the same time, out of protection, Nami and the others were not taken with them. Under the personal leadership of Tina, Ning Chuan soon arrived at Marine's temporary conference room. Warring States period Fleet Admiral went out in person to greet Ning Chuan in order to show Marine's sincerity. Hello Ning Chuan, I've heard Lieutenant General Garp introduce you a long time ago. It's true that a hero comes from a boy. As soon as the Warring States period came, Ning Chuan was given a greasy rhetoric. Ning Chuan couldn't help but want to roll his eyes after hearing this. After all, Ning Chuan knew Garp's temper very well. With this old guy's temper, he probably wouldn't tell others about his affairs. And Sengoku knew that Garp knew him, and he probably only found out not long ago. Look at the weird expression on Garp's face. Ning Chuan quickly confirmed his suspicion. After inviting Ning Chuan to the conference room, Warring States stopped beating around the bush and looked directly at Ning Chuan and spoke seriously. Ning Chuan, on behalf of Marine Fleet Admiral, I formally invite you to join Marine Headquarters. As long as you are willing to come to Marine, you will start as Major General Marine. You can choose 1,000-man Marine from the elite Marine force. The Marine Headquarters will not interfere too much with your actions, and you are directly responsible to me and do not need to listen to anyone else's orders. The Warring States period kept making conditions. These conditions are so generous that they far exceed the treatment given to those Shichibukai by the world government. The other senior executives were shocked when they heard this. They couldn't believe that the Warring States period was willing to spend so much money for Ning Chuan. I'm afraid he will be trained as Marine's future successor. Which of the people present is not a human being? Naturally, we can see the intention of the Warring States period. However, facing such generous conditions, Ning Chuan's expression remained calm. He listened carefully, but gave no answer. Ning Chuan, how are you thinking about it? I can give you some time to think about it, and you can give me an answer after the buggy wrapping is over. Warring States has lowered his attitude very low. It seems that he really fell in love with this talented guy Ning Chuan. Sengoku Fleet Admiral, your terms are generous. But, I have no ambition to be a Marine. Seeing that Ning Chuan could reject Warring States so decisively, the surrounding Marine executives, except Garp, were all dumbfounded. Ha ha ha, interesting boy, my temper is just like Lousy's. I knew you would choose this way. At this time, Garp did not forget to add fuel to the fire. It wasn't until Sengoku's angry fist hit his head that Garp recovered from his excitement. He realized that now didn't seem like a good time to joke. Boy, you just refused. Don't think about it anymore. Warring States held on to the last glimmer of hope, looked at Ning Chuan and said. Ning Chuan shook his head firmly again. Bad boy. Become a Marine, enforce justice, and fight against pirates all over the world. What's wrong with this? Why do you refuse? Is justice so unbearable in your heart? Looking at Ning Chuan's attitude at this time, Akainu, who has always had a hot temper, couldn't help but stand up and tried to suppress Ning Chuan with his momentum. Facing the suddenly violent Akainu, Ning Chuan smiled slightly and thought to himself. As expected of Akainu, this is starting to get anxious. If I tease him a little more, I'm afraid he will have to compete with me. By then, he should be able to get the power of the lava fruit. Thinking of this, Ning Chuan stopped saving any face for Akainu. He struck with words that directly poked at the pain point in his heart. Does the so-called justice mean being a dog to the powerful people of the celestial dragons? Akainu's face instantly turned livid under Ning Chuan's ridicule. The power of the lava on his body surged like a volcanic eruption, causing the temperature in the entire temporary conference room to rise sharply. Fortunately, he still controlled his anger. He didn't let the lava in his body flood the entire temporary conference room. The Marine executives present felt an extremely depressing atmosphere at this moment. None of them expected that this boy Ning Chuan would dare to speak like this. Marine acts as a dog to the world government, which is an aggrieved fact that every Marine executive cannot avoid. But it's a matter of face. No one had ever dared to mention it on such an occasion. However, now, Ning Chuan, that brat, has exposed this matter in public. He does this as if he is holding the sharpest knife to dig into everyone's hearts. Lies never hurt anyone, the truth is the fastest knife. Therefore, under Ning Chuan's ridicule, except for Garp, the rest of Marine's senior departments all had dark faces and looked at Ning Chuan with unkind eyes. But at this moment, Lieutenant General Garp, a hero who enjoys high prestige in Marine. But unexpectedly he laughed in front of everyone. Ha ha ha, this kid is really brave. He actually dares to tell the truth in front of us. It's really, well, Garp's laughter broke everyone's silence. At this moment, all Marine executives turned to look at Garp. Seeing the unkind looks on other people's faces, Garp suddenly froze on the spot. Then an awkward smile appeared on his old face, and he scratched his head and said, "Ah, did I say the wrong thing again?" Look at Garp pretending to be dumbfounded. Warring States couldn't help but roared at him. "Garp, if you don't speak, no one will think you are dumb." Just like that, the silent scene just now was once again confused by Garp's troubles. But when no one else was prepared to delve into the matter, Akainu walked up to Ning Chuan step by step, looked at him condescendingly, and said, "If you dare to say such words, I'm afraid you are quite confident in your own strength, right? Then, can you let me see the strength of a guy like you who disdains being a dog? If you can't satisfy me, I will be very angry." Akainu's voice was low and angry. It can be seen that what Ning Chuan just said really made him angry. After all, for Akainu, it's okay if you don't agree with him. But if you dare to deny his justice, then it is equivalent to denying his life. How can he not be angry? "Akainu, calm down." Sengoku Fleet Admiral's voice suddenly sounded. He is well aware of Akainu's temper and understands that he needs to control the situation at this moment. Tong Yan Wuji, put the overall situation first. After hearing this, Akainu took a deep breath and barely suppressed the anger in his heart. However, he still looked at Ning Chuan coldly, with anger constantly pouring out of his eyes. "Boy, I'll wait for you outside. I want to see if you are really qualified to say such things to me." After saying that, Akainu disappeared directly on the deck and came to the edge of the fleet, seemingly waiting for Ning Chuan's arrival. After hearing what Akainu said, not only was Ning Chuan not afraid, but the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. He turned to look at Sengoku and the other Marine executives, and smiled. "Sorry everyone, I have to excuse myself for a while." As soon as he finished speaking, he chased in the direction Akainu left. Upon seeing this, the other Marine executives looked at each other and chased after him. They wanted to see what Ning Chuan's real strength was. How will he perform when facing Marine's most powerful Akainu? Looking at the direction Ning Chuan left, Sengoku nudged Garp on the side with his elbow, and couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Garp, did you expect Ning Chuan to react like this?" Garp didn't answer directly, but his expression revealed everything. Obviously, he was not surprised by Ning Chuan's reaction. That boy from Ningchuan never plays his cards according to common sense. His thoughts are not so easy to guess. Just like this time, I'm afraid this kid is plotting against Akainu again. The last time I met him, I accidentally fell into his trap. After listening to Garp's words, Sangwo's eyes flashed with surprise. Against Akainu? Is there anything he wants in Akainu? Warring States thought for a long time, but couldn't guess what Ning Chuan wanted to do. In desperation, he had no choice but to chase out like the others, preparing to see the collision between Ning Chuan and Akainu. Ning Chuan and Akainu stood on the open sea far away from the fleet. The waves around the two of them were rough, but the sea under their feet was unusually calm, as if they were intimidated by the powerful aura of the two of them. At this time, Akainu's body was filled with boiling magma. There was a hint of imperceptible recognition in his eyes when he looked at Ning Chuan. He was quite pleased that Ning Chuan dared to challenge him. If this boy Ning Chuan is afraid of his identity as a general, he would not even dare to come. Then Akainu will look down on this little brat who only takes advantage of his words. Looking at Ning Chuan standing on the sea opposite him, there were no extra words between the two, after simple eye contact. The next moment, the tyrannical armed domineering energy began to burst out from both of them at the same time. As the two figures passed by in a flash, a sound of fists and feet clashing appeared in the ears of the onlookers. The two men's offensive unfolded like a gust of wind. Every punch and kick of Ning Chuan carried extremely tyrannical power. It doesn't look like the tyranny a person of his age should be at all. Even Akainu felt a little pressure. There is no doubt that Ning Chuan's armed color and domineering level are naturally top-notch. Watch this scene. Sengoku, Aokiji, Garp and other Marine senior executives were all shocked by the scene before them. They originally thought that Ning Chuan was quite powerful. But in front of Akainu, the Marine general, he might not be able to hold on for long. However, the reality was far beyond their expectations. In terms of domineering alone, Ning Chuan's cultivation is already quite terrifying. Not only was he not suppressed by Akainu's offensive, but he became more courageous as he fought. Everyone can feel that Ning Chuan's domineering power is getting stronger and stronger under such circumstances. This kid is really a monster. There was unconcealable pride in Garp's tone. I didn't expect that after being separated from him for a while, his domineering cultivation has reached this level. Although I knew that this kid was making rapid progress, I never thought that his progress could be so fast. At this time, what no one knows is, Ning Chuan was in the middle of a domineering confrontation with Akainu. He kept asking the system to calculate the results of his armed color domineering training. Against someone like Akainu, Ning Chuan's armed domineering power is much faster than when he was practicing and settling on his own. Ning Chuan enjoys this process of improving his strength. However, as Ning Chuan's armed appearance became more and more domineering, Akainu, who was fighting against him, gradually felt that he couldn't stand it anymore. After secretly cursing, "Perverted boy," Akainu decided not to retain his strength. Without any hesitation, he directly activated his lava fruit ability. "Boy, you are indeed very domineering. There are not many people who can beat you in this aspect. But no matter how powerful you are, there are limits. And Logia, the sky's the limit." Akainu finished his words. His whole body was like a volcano erupting. Every subsequent punch was accompanied by a large amount of lava spraying. Even the nearby sea surface was dyed with a layer of hot lava red light. Seeing this scene, the corners of Ning Chuan's mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. "Have you finally used the fruit? This is the moment I've been waiting for." A fierce look flashed in Akainu's eyes. At this moment, he no longer had any reservations. The power of the lava fruit surges out like a volcano. Dark Hound. Akainu no longer held back, and directly used the moves he used when fighting enemies on the sea. His fists were wrapped in hot magma and carrying destructive power, heading straight for Ning Chuan's face. Even the strong men of New World would not dare to take this blow easily. Is it the Dark Hound that knocked off half of Whitebeard's face? However, lava has no effect on me. Facing Dark Hound played by Akainu, Ning Chuan chose the simplest and most direct way to respond. He did not choose to dodge, but faced the terrifying lava and stretched out his fist directly. With his fists covered in armament and domineering force, he faced Dark Hound forcefully. At this moment, time seems to have frozen. The eyes of everyone watching were focused on this moment. Everyone who was familiar with the horror of Akainu Dark Hound stared at the two people in the middle of the battlefield without even blinking. They want to take a look. Under this terrifying blow from Akainu, can Ning Chuan survive? Boom! The two forces collided fiercely in midair. His lava fist, which was filled with extremely terrifying heat, was shattered by Ning Chuan's punch. Looking at the lava splattering all over the sky in the distance, blocking everyone's sight. Seeing this scene, everyone onlookers were shocked to the point of disbelief. If the lava arm is blown away, even Ning Chuan will have to bear a huge price. It's a pity. Although this kid is extremely fierce, he is still lava after all. Even if Ning Chuan doesn't die, he will at least be seriously injured. The lava fruit is really powerful. Most people can't resist the power of this lava. This boy's abilities don't stop there. Just when the Marines who were watching were talking bad about Ning Chuan, Garp had an unconcealable smile on his face. Warring states on the side originally thought that Ning Chuan might be seriously injured by this blow. But looking at Garp's appearance, he began to hesitate. Could it be that this boy Ning Chuan really has a way to withstand the terrifying heat of lava? Just when Warring States was filled with doubts, the lava all over the sky began to gradually sink to the bottom of the sea. Ning Chuan and Akainu, who were surrounded by lava, gradually revealed their respective figures. However, when the two of them appeared, something happened that shocked everyone. Ning Chuan's body is still standing there extremely stable, as steady as a rock. It's as if Akainu's Dark Hound didn't cause him any substantial harm. On the other hand, Akainu looked at his shattered lava arm with a gloomy expression. There was a look of disbelief written on his face. What kind of monster are you? Why can it block the terrifying heat of my lava? After hearing Akainu's words, Ning Chuan couldn't help but smile. As long as you are exposed to lava more, you will naturally become resistant to it. However, I happened to be exposed to these things not long ago. Therefore, your lava fruit is no longer a big threat to me. Looking at the relaxed and confident expression on Ningchuan's face, Akainu's heart was filled with huge waves, already resistant to lava. What a joke! How can a human body be resistant to something like lava? Although Akainu couldn't believe what he heard, but this living example before him told him that what Ningchuan said seemed to be true. Since Dark Hound can take you down, then let's try this trick. Dog bites Gurren. Akainu's anger reached its peak, and he decided not to hold back anymore and used his strongest move. A large amount of extremely hot lava seemed to have gained life under his control. They gathered together and turned into a ferocious hell dog, carrying the aura of destruction that seemed to come from hell. In this blow, Akainu almost used all his strength. The power of the lava fruit was also maximized by him at this moment. The temperature of the lava began to become unprecedentedly high at this moment. The magma that seems to be able to melt everything is constantly boiling out of Akainu's body. Facing this attack is enough to make most strong men daunted. There was no fear in Ningchuan's eyes, but a strange smile flashed across his eyes. This time, he didn't even stretch out his fist. He just stood there, seemingly waiting for Akainu's attack to arrive. Boom! When the hell dog turned into lava hit Ningchuan's position, Ningchuan immediately pushed his domineering power to the limit. His mind began to quickly recall the subtle changes in Akainu's body that he had observed before when he used the lava fruit. When the dog bite Red Lotus fell on him, a large amount of extremely hot lava instantly surrounded Ningchuan. This moment, Ningchuan, who had been stunned there, finally moved. But this time, what he moved was not his body, but his lips. System, start settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully experiencing the power of the lava fruit for 10 seconds and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully obtaining the ability to feel the lava fruit and returning the 100,000-second cultivation. Host's understanding of lava fruit's abilities has improved. After gaining a deep understanding of the rules of operation of the lava fruit in Akainu's body, Ningchuan did not hesitate at all, and continued to speak in his mind based on his understanding of the lava fruit. System, continue settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully experiencing the power of the lava fruit for 20 seconds and activating the 10,000-fold return system. By the time Ningchuan had almost mastered every detail of the lava fruit, Ningchuan no longer hesitated and directly began to try to give birth to lava fruits in his body. As Ningchuan's heart moved, the next moment, a little hot lava began to flow out from the tips of his fingers. Success! Ningchuan was overjoyed. Then, he continued to speak in his mind. System, continue settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully using the lava fruit ability for 5 seconds and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to the host for successfully obtaining the ability to feel the lava fruit and returning the 50,000-second cultivation level. Host has been able to skillfully use the power of lava fruit. Wait until this time to try the lava fruit's cultivation and return it to your account. Ningchuan once again showed a smile. Next, let's try elementalization. After the system informed Ningchuan that he could use the power of the lava fruit, Ningchuan was ready to let his body try to elementalize. Become part of the lava in the sky and merge with this pile of lava. As the idea of elementalization emerged in Ningchuan's mind, his body began to change. He only felt an unprecedented power begin to emerge in his body. At this moment, he seemed to have established some mysterious connection with the lava. His skin, muscles, and even bones began to take on a lava-like color at this moment. His body started to look like Akainu, with molten lava constantly coming out. Gradually, he was completely wrapped in the lava. This moment, Ningchuan seemed to have turned into the incarnation of lava. His current form of existence seems to be no longer a simple human form, and like a life form coexisting with lava. With this change, even Akainu himself, who had eaten the lava fruit, felt a bit shocked and puzzled at this moment. This kid, how is that possible? A look of disbelief flashed in Akainu's eyes. He never thought that someone could imitate the ability of the lava fruit. No, this shouldn't be imitation. To be precise, he transformed his body into an element exactly like his own. Become like lava. What happened to Ning Chuan was beyond Akainu's understanding. He has served in the Marines for so many years, and his understanding of devil fruit is far beyond the average person. But he had never heard of it. A second person can use the power of a devil fruit. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. If he can also use the lava fruit, then who am I who ate the fruit? Thinking of this, Akainu actually shuddered. However, this scene is happening now surrounded by magma. Except for him and Ning Chuan, no one else was seen. Even if Akainu wanted to talk to someone, he probably wouldn't be able to find one. Hateful. If this kid is not willing to use the power of the lava fruit next. Even if I tell this matter, no one will believe it, right? Looking at Ning Chuan, who had completely turned into a part of the magma emerging from his body. Akainu felt helpless at this time. Because he discovered something that made him extremely helpless. That is, he can no longer tell which is the lava coming out of his body. Which ones are Ningchuan? As time passes by, Ningchuan's current state of being completely enveloped in lava has aroused concern among the marine executives present. They stared at the churning mass of lava on the sea. I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. The original duel has now become somewhat unpredictable. Ever since Ningchuan was surrounded by a large amount of lava. It's been a long time since I've seen any signs of struggle or fight back from him. This made all the marine executives who were watching start to worry. Has the little brat Ning Chuan encountered something unexpected? At this moment, Warring States frowned, hesitating in his heart whether to speak to stop the duel at this time. He was worried about Ning Chuan's safety, fearing that he would be irreversibly damaged by this terrifying magma force. This is a boy with unlimited potential and a sense of justice, even if he doesn't join Marine in the future. Then it can also cause a big blow to the pirates on the sea and bring a lot of help to the Marines. Now, if he accidentally gets killed here, it would be a huge loss to the entire world. However, he was also afraid that Ning Chuan would lose an opportunity to grow because of his intervention. A battle with a top-notch combat force like a general. For young people like Ning Chuan, it is an excellent opportunity to learn combat experience. If he just intervened in their battle and made Ning Chuan miss some opportunities for progress, then he will regret it too. The heart of the Warring States period was in great contradiction at this moment. Garp, who was standing next to him, also showed a rare worried look at this moment. Although he looked carefree, he didn't seem to care about Ning Chuan's affairs. But now, it can be clearly seen from his expression that he is still very worried about Ning Chuan. Garp is well aware of Ning Chuan's potential and believes that he will not necessarily lose to Akainu. But he also understood, no matter who it is, even yourself. When faced with the absolute power of Akainu's lava fruit, there may be situations where you are unable to do what you want. This kid, what a great game. Even if it's steel, it should be refined after being in the lava for such a long time. There was a hint of helplessness in Garp's tone. The surrounding marine executives, including Aokiji and the lieutenant generals, also fell silent. In their hearts, there is both admiration for Ningchuan and concerns about Ningchuan's current situation. At the same time, when everyone was paying attention to Ning Chuan's life and death. However, Ning Chuan swam in the sea of lava emerging from Akainu's body. It was his first time to elementalize his body, and he felt amazing about this feeling. He transformed into a lava element and swam in the ocean of lava. Every drop of lava seems to be invaded and controlled by Ning Chuan, turning it into a part of himself. While feeling this wonderful feeling, Ning Chuan did not forget to continue to improve his control over the lava fruit's ability. System, start settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully using the lava fruit ability for 5 minutes and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully using the ability to feel the lava fruit and getting 50,000 minutes of cultivation back. Host's lava fruit ability has been greatly improved. System, continue settlement. As the system returns the cultivation level again and again, it will arrive in your account. Ning Chuan found that his control over the lava began to become stronger and stronger. Look at the lava surrounding his body. An interesting idea suddenly popped into Ning Chuan's mind. He wants to control the lava and let it flow back into Akainu's body. Just do it. Under the control of Ning Chuan, the sea of lava beneath him actually began to flow back into Akainu's body. The marine executives who were watching all breathed a sigh of relief when they saw this scene. They knew that Akainu started to recover lava, which seemed to mean that this time the battle was coming to an end. However, it looks like Akainu won. However, what no one can guess is, the lava flowing back is not Akainu's will. At this time, Akainu was shocked by the backflow of lava. What's going on? Why is this lava flowing back into my body? I didn't control them. Could it be? There was no hesitation. Akainu quickly severed contact with these lava. He was afraid that Ning Chuan would use the lava to use unimaginable means on him. Ning Chuan's sudden attack really made him feel an unprecedented threat. If there weren't too many marine senior officials watching, Akainu wouldn't want to show any weakness in front of them. Otherwise, he would have asked Ning Chuan with a shocked face. What happened to TND? Is it possible that the lava flowing back into my body is controlled by you, a brat? As the lava on the sea gradually sank to the bottom of the sea, it disappeared. The duel between Ning Chuan and Akainu finally came to an end. There was silence on the battlefield. The sea finally returned to calm. Of all the people watching, no one could tell exactly who the winner of this duel was. At this time, Akainu's face was filled with uncertainty. It was a complex mixture of emotions, including shock at Ning Chuan's special ability and unwillingness to fail to win. There was a rare solemn look in Akainu's eyes. This is almost impossible to see in normal times. As for Ning Chuan, his expression looked particularly relaxed at this time. It was as if the battle between the two just now was just an ordinary training for him. Looking at Akainu with a strange expression, and Ning Chuan who was extremely calm, Aokiji suddenly felt an urge to test Ning Chuan's strength. He wanted to know what was so weird about Ning Chuan. It can make Akainu, a guy who gives himself a headache, show such a weird look. However, after looking at the shocked expressions on the faces of the people around me, Aokiji knew that now seemed not a good time to fight Ning Chuan again. So, Aokiji decided to wait until night to find a suitable time to meet Ning Chuan. After successfully mastering the ability of the lava fruit, Ning Chuan's eyes turned to Aokiji and Sengoku involuntarily. These two are the strongest warriors among the Marines and both possess powerful fruit abilities. Frozen fruit and Renren fruit Buddha form. Aokiji's Ice Age and Warring States period transformed into a Golden Buddha, which gave him a super boost in combat power. This makes Ning Chuan extremely coveted for these two abilities. However, Ning Chuan knew. It seems that such an ability is no longer available today. Today, a general took action, but he failed to take down himself. If another general comes or the Marine Fleet Admiral takes action personally, they still can't defeat themselves. Then Marine really has no place to put his face. In order to prevent such things from happening, it is impossible for people to fight against Ning Chuan again during the Warring States period. Ba bang bang. Yes, it is true that a hero comes from a young boy. There are not many people in the entire sea who can survive in Akainu's hands for so long and remain intact. This battle really opened our eyes. Warring States' voice suddenly rang at this time. Both Ning Chuan and Akainu could understand the meaning of the Warring States dialect. So they both stopped fighting tacitly and had no intention of fighting anymore. However, at this time, Akainu looked at Ning Chuan in a very strange way. He still couldn't figure out how Ning Chuan managed to use the lava fruit ability. Therefore, Akainu decided, if there is a chance to meet Ning Chuan alone, he must figure this out. Little friend Ning Chuan, you must be a little tired from the battle just now, right? How about we go back to the conference room and take a rest? Let's discuss how to round up Buggy the Clown next. Hear the sincere invitation of the Warring States period. Ning Chuan smiled, shook his head and said seriously, Sengoku Fleet Admiral, this should be regarded as your Marine's secret. I, an outsider, will not participate. What's more, I just went through a big battle and I have to go back and rest for a while. If you need help next time, you can tell me and I will do my best to help you. I saw Ning Chuan say this. The Warring States period had no choice but to let Ning Chuan go back for the time being. When Ning Chuan left, Warring States couldn't stop sighing in his heart. I'm really unwilling to let this good young talent of Marine go like this. After Ning Chuan left, a group of Marine executives also returned to the temporary conference room. Sengoku, who was sitting in the middle seat, was keenly aware of the strange look on Akainu's face that could not be concealed. He knew that Akainu was not someone who showed his emotions easily, especially in situations like this. After a brief meeting, we explained the work to be done next. The meeting was dissolved. When everyone dispersed, only a few of them were left in the room. Sengoku took the initiative to come to Akainu and spoke with a hint of curiosity. Akainu, what happened? Why do you look so ugly? Akainu felt hesitant after hearing this. At this moment, he couldn't help but recall all the strange phenomena that occurred during his confrontation with Ning Chuan just now. Especially the lava fruit ability that Ning Chuan suddenly showed. That control over the lava is almost as good as the lava ability he controlled after eating the lava fruit. However, Akainu knows it. Such a thing, if there is no conclusive evidence, it is difficult to convince others. But now, after all, it was Warring States who asked himself. After hesitating for a while, he finally expressed his doubts. Fleet Admiral, Akainu's voice was solemn. Ning Chuan seems to have some understanding of the power of the lava fruit, and he can even imitate and use part of it. Hear the words. Warring States frowned slightly, a look of surprise flashed in his eyes. Can Ning Chuan use the ability of lava fruit? Are you sure you saw it correctly? There was a hint of uncertainty in Sengoku's tone. After all, such a thing is really shocking. One of the common sense in the sea is that the power of a devil fruit can only be mastered by one person, it is unique. Unless the person dies, this ability will remain with a person forever and cannot be transferred. But now, Akainu revealed Ning Chuan's ability to use his lava fruit. This really made him subvert his cognition. Akainu nodded, but then shook his head. It's not exactly the same, but I'm certain that he did master some of the abilities of the lava fruit. As for how he did it, I don't know. Akainu didn't look like he was joking. Sengoku pondered for a moment, looked at Aokiji and Garp around him and said seriously. Everyone, we will not disclose this matter to the outside world for the time being. This is probably related to the reason why Ning Chuan is so powerful. Hearing this, several people present nodded their heads. Only Aokiji had a different thought in his heart. Can you imitate other people's fruit abilities? Then I'm going to meet this guy for a while. After Ning Chuan returned to the ship, he told the three of Nami about the battle between himself and Akainu. Listening to Ning Chuan talk about the thrilling process, Nami, Nokigao, and Kuina were all worried about him. At the same time, they all stepped forward, lifted up Ning Chuan's clothes and carefully checked to see if he was injured. It wasn't until the three of them checked Ning Chuan thoroughly and found that he was not injured that they finally felt relieved. In this way, Ning Chuan and Nami stayed on the boat. The four of them played mahjong together, which was invented by Ning Chuan. It wasn't until night after Nami and the others had fallen asleep. Ning Chuan seemed to sense something and suddenly sat up from his bed. I saw him flying out of the cabin and onto the deck. Until he saw the bicycle parked on the sea. A smile appeared on the corner of Ning Chuan's mouth, and he said with a smile. I didn't expect General Aokiji to be interested in an ordinary kid like me. You can fight to a draw with a general at such a young age. Whoever it is, I think they will be curious. Aokiji smiled, looked up at Ning Chuan above his head and continued. However, you can guess the purpose of my coming here. You are quite interesting. I like. Ning Chuan did not show any expression in response to Aokiji's praise. Still maintaining a smile. Is this just why you came to my place this time? Is there nothing else? Regarding Ning Chuan's problem, Aokiji was stunned for a moment, and then there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Good guy. You kid, you can't even guess this, right? Warring States Fleet Admiral will invite you to participate in the roundup of Buggy the Clown tomorrow. If you are interested, come with the warship tomorrow. After hearing what I wanted to hear from Aokiji, the smile on Ning Chuan's face became even thicker, as if he had already guessed that this would happen. Looking at the confident smile on Ning Chuan's face, Aokiji then understood that Ning Chuan was really not a simple boy. He could even guess this. But it's really not surprising when you think about it. After all, Marine's huge formation this time is coming for Buggy. After thinking of this, Aokiji also had a smile on his face. He stretched out his hand to invite Ning Chuan. How about we go there to communicate? I'm very curious about you now. Looking at Aokiji, he looked full of fighting spirit. Ning Chuan asked him a question that was somewhat unexpected. Right, I have a question now, that is, how much is the bounty for killing Buggy of the Celestial Dragons? Hearing Ning Chuan's words, Aokiji was obviously stunned, and then he thought with a smile on his face. He is indeed a child, and he is still concerned about the bounty issue. Does he want to snatch Buggy away in exchange for the bounty while being surrounded by Marine? Aokiji thought for a moment and said directly. That guy Buggy the Clown was so brave that he actually killed the Celestial Dragons. In addition, he seems to have a powerful ability to split fruits, and it seems that he can make everything close to him fall apart. Taking into account his danger, the world government has set a bounty for him. 3.5 billion Baileys. Ning Chuan was not surprised when he heard the amount of the bounty. It was not much different from what he initially guessed. Yes, more than 3 billion yuan is enough to pay off Garp's debt. But, with Buggy's luck, I'm afraid it won't be that easy to catch this time, right? After Ning Chuan thought for a moment, he smiled slightly. For this bounty criminal created by himself, he didn't feel guilty at all. Shall we go there to communicate? Looking at Ning Chuan, it seemed that there were no other problems. Aokiji invited again. Ning Chuan nodded, flew out and followed Aokiji's bicycle. Until the two of them arrived far enough away from where the fleet gathered. They just stopped. I think it's great here, what about you? Aokiji froze his bicycle on the sea and looked at Ning Chuan with a smile. Ning Chuan spread his hands, he actually didn't care where he fought. As long as it doesn't affect Nami and the others' rest, it's fine. Aokiji's eyes fell on Ning Chuan, with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Ning Chuan is a boy who cannot lose in a battle with his mortal enemy Akainu. It really made him feel unprecedented expectations. Ning Chuan, I heard Akainu say that you used the power of the lava fruit in your duel with him. So, are you able to use the lava fruit's ability now? When Ning Chuan heard this, a smile appeared on his lips. He didn't hide anything, he just nodded and admitted. After all, it is only a matter of time before one's abilities are exposed. He has no intention of hiding his abilities. Seeing Ning Chuan admit it directly and generously, Aokiji raised his eyebrows slightly, and there was a flash of surprise in his eyes. He didn't expect that Ning Chuan would admit it so frankly. It seems that he is quite confident in his abilities. So, Aokiji paused and continued. No wonder Lieutenant General Garp said before that you might be planning something. That's it. If that's the case, will you be able to master the power of my frozen fruit after fighting me next? I'm curious, what kind of fruit did you eat? Hearing this, Ning Chuan smiled slightly and did not answer Aokiji's question directly. If you don't want to answer, forget it. Everyone has their own secrets. Let's start discussing. Aokiji looked at where Ning Chuan was and smiled. Then I saw his palm pressed against the sea. Before Ning Chuan could react, what kind of move he was going to use. Suddenly, Aokiji whispered softly. Ice Age. Aokiji showed no hesitation or carelessness. As soon as he came up, he used his signature trick. The next moment, the atmosphere of the Ice Age instantly spread out with him as the center. A terrifying cold current swept across the entire sea area instantly. A thick layer of ice quickly formed on the rough sea, trapping Ning Chuan in it. Aokiji's move was beyond Ning Chuan's expectations. He turned up the speed right away, disrupting Ning Chuan's plan of slowly competing. However, Ning Chuan was not disturbed by Aokiji's use of Ice Age as soon as he came up. Instead, he immediately used his armed hockey to defend. At the moment when he was frozen into an ice sculpture, the corners of his mouth moved slightly and he muttered softly. System, start settlement. Congratulations to the host for successfully resisting freezing for 10 seconds with his domineering energy and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to the host for successfully using his domineering energy to withstand freezing for 100,000 seconds and receiving a refund. Host's resistance to freezing has been greatly improved. System, continue settlement. Congratulations to host for successfully resisting freezing with his domineering power. System, continues settlement. As Ning Chuan passed through the system again and again, his resistance to freezing began to settle. Soon after, Ning Chuan felt that his body had adapted to the extremely low temperature of the ice. It's exactly the same as in a normal environment. Now, the side effects of freezing ability are no longer effective on Ning Chuan. Ning Chuan has acquired freezing immunity. Now I'm starting to think about the frozen fruit ability again. System, start calculating the frozen fruits I observe. Congratulations to the host for successfully observing the frozen fruits ability for 8 seconds and activating the 10,000-fold return system. Start practice settlement now. Settlement is successful. Congratulations to host for successfully obtaining the ability to observe frozen fruits for 80,000 seconds and returning the cultivation level. Host's understanding of frozen fruits has improved. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.